Chapter 964. The small boat slowly glided across Lake Luwak. It was a small and dark lake, located in the middle of Drow City. It separated the Wizard Tower from the other two towers of the three-tower building. Jarlaxle sat at the bow of the boat and looked to the west. The caves and stalactites in the distance gradually appeared in front of his eyes. However, to his night vision, this scene seemed a little strange. It looked blurry. At first, he thought that it was caused by the warm current rising from the lake, so he did not pay much attention to it. However, when the Drow figured out the real reason for the blurry infrared vision, some things from a long time ago gradually swayed in his memories. It's so similar to that time, the mercenary leader thought to himself. The Benra family of Morseblight City first ordered the whole city to light the lamps, and then they walked to their own end. Drow did not like bright light. This was not only due to biological reasons, but also due to more than 7,000 years of tradition. Back then, the old matriarch of the Benra family, who ordered herself not to die, went against the flow and called for the entire city to light the fire because she was driven by her own ambition. She wanted to unite the Drow in a city to invade the surface and establish a dynasty named after her. She needed the Drow to forcibly adapt. When the orc sailor was rowing the boat, a series of horns sounded behind him. He finally had the time to organize his thoughts. Jarlaxle closed his eyes, trying to turn his night vision into normal light vision. He remembered the last time he came to this underground city. He saw the stalactites and the magnificent buildings. The intricate patterns on them were illuminated by flashing purple, blue, or red demonic flames. Suddenly, the small boat swayed, and the orc sailor's rowing horn came to an abrupt end. The mercenary leader thought that a few of his companions in the adventure team were causing trouble again, but when he opened his eyes, he saw a large ship passing by the small boat. The banana-like ship was very close to the small boat, so close that it was uncomfortable. Moreover, there was a blue-purple magic floating disc floating at the bow of the ship. That was the common mode of transportation used by the matriarchs. Metz Baritana. Jarlaxle recognized the emblem on the side of the banana boat. The Metz Baritana family was the first Drow family in this underground city. However, the position of this family was a little awkward. Although they were the first family, the current actual ruler of the Wandering Drow clan was actually a group of blasphemous priests. Keys also sized up the banana boat. And just as the blue dragon youth in human form looked at it, Drow, who was standing on the magic floating disc, also turned his head. Matriarch Metz Baritana saw the boat and the male Drow on the boat. Jarlaxle had once again used some unknown magical item to change his appearance. She also saw the few cobras that he brought along. Huh! Mother Joie was suddenly suspicious. It was not surprising for a Drow to bring along a few slaves, but the equipment on these abandoned people was too gorgeous. No Drow would allow their slaves to have such good things, even the males who were known for their stupidity. She is a matriarch. She should be suspicious of us now. Jarlaxle immediately informed his companions using telepathy. The mercenary leader did not make a judgment. He knew who was the one who made the decision in this team. Can you disguise as her? Keys also asked in telepathy. Moreover, his question was one way. No problem. As long as I am close enough, I will have enough time to observe the details of her clothes and appearance. Keys smiled and suggested to the group, "Let's go and rob that boat." He looked at the dwarf who had been squatting in the middle of the boat since he sat on the boat. His hands were holding the sides of the boat tightly. That boat is big enough. It is safer and more stable. It will not shake so much. When the digger heard this, his eyes suddenly lit up. He was so happy that he suddenly stood up and almost fell out of the boat. "You!" The orc boatman was just about to speak when Marsh Fezzik, who was standing next to him, slapped him on the neck. The orc druid directly knocked him out. "This time I will go first." After that, Marsh Fezzik jumped into Lake Luwak. Everyone looked down from the water and saw that he quickly turned into a huge crab-like monster. His 8 legs were long and sharp like curved spears. His entire body was covered with a shell full of sharp spikes. 2 large and fast pincers savagely slapped the surface of the water as if desperately wanting to clamp something in half. The orc druid had turned into a shark-eating crab. "Let's go too," Calder, the adventurous halfling, instigated. He could not wait to join in the fun. "Idiot, sit tight. I won't save you if you fall." The dwarf patted the halfling's shoulder and pressed him to the middle of the boat. Keys took out his electromagnetic assault nail gun. "Grindel is right. Now all of you sit tight." As he spoke, the young blue dragon in human form pulled the trigger. As he spoke, he changed the electromagnetic gun to a special bullet. A steel nail with a string attached to the tail and a claw at the head flew out from the muzzle with a swoosh sound. After hitting the side of the target, Keys held the gun in one hand and the string in the other, pulling the small boat towards the large ship at an extremely fast speed. The small boat drew a white line on the surface of the water, and in the blink of an eye, it even surpassed Marsh Fezzik, who had jumped into the water earlier. Oh woo! Even with Grindel holding his shoulder, Calder still, stubbornly, raised his head and looked around. It was the first time the halfling experienced the feeling of riding a speedboat. He could not help but cry out in excitement. Fortunately, his cry did not travel too far and was, physically suppressed by the dwarf in time. Jarlaxle took out a magic flute from nowhere and after fiddling with it a few times, the space including the 2 boats was covered by a faintly rainbow-colored, soap bubble-like membrane. Before the membrane broke, not only magic communication, even sound could not be transmitted from the inside to the outside. The small boat drew a semicircle on the surface of the water and changed from a parallel state to a T shape before crashing into the side of the banana boat. Keys did not have to worry about Jarlaxle and Calder. The mercenary leader and the great trap maker were far more agile than ordinary people. The shark-eating crab, who had just arrived, used its spear-like claws to poke at the side of the boat and rushed straight to the deck of the banana boat as if it was flat ground. Keys held Grindel Millennium's shoulder with one hand and pulled the string with the other. Both of his legs kicked the small boat hard. He brought along a dwarf who was trying his best to hold his breath and not let out a roar as he boarded the deck of Metz Baratana's big ship. Chapter 965. Needless to say, the drow on the Metz Baratana family's ship knew that a battle was inevitable. A female drow warrior with a pair of swords attacked Karth. She saw that the other party was carrying a dwarf and was not standing firm. Keys quickly threw Grinder to the side and swung his spear to hit the opponent's swords, letting out a long cry. The female warrior fought back fiercely for a while, but gradually her movements became slower and slower, struggling to cope with the tricky attacks of the bayonet on Drizzt's electromagnetic nail gun. She raised her sword and blocked the blow from the gun's handle on the right. She raised her sword, trying to stop the bayonet's slash. However, Quessa's slash was just a feint. The only thing that rushed out was her own 2 swords. Once she realized that it was a feint, she stopped her sword and turned back to defend. It was too late. Keys stomped on the enemy's knee, and the female drow immediately knelt on the ground. The next second, the bayonet sank into the gap of the delicate chain mail. He was now wide open, but the female warrior had no strength or life to attack again. The bayonet beautifully pierced her heart, and she lost everything. When Keys pulled back the bayonet, she only trembled a little. Other than Keys, the other members of the adventurer team also performed well. Jarlaxle's target was the matriarch of the Metz Baratana family. This experienced warlock did not even have the time to cast a spell before she was blinded by a flash bomb shot by the mercenary leader. She then used the lifesteal light sword and the crimson rapier to open 2 holes in her body. Calder disappeared as soon as he reached the deck. But from the miserable state of the drow family guards who stepped on the slime traps and were hit from time to time, this great trap maker was indeed worthy of his reputation. The dwarven digger stood on the deck, stepping on the relatively solid ground, and his combat strength was greatly improved. He used his skillful martial arts to attack the lower part of the body, and so far he had succeeded in making more than a dozen drow walk with crutches for the rest of their lives. Of course, the premise was that they could survive today. As for the orc druid that had transformed into a shark-eating crab, he found the only cave lizard knight on the ship. The latter were the traditional heavy cavalry of the drow race. They would ride cave lizards that could climb walls and fight with their spears. However, because they were on a ship, the cave lizard knights lost their advantage of attacking from strange angles. Faced with the violent attacks of the shark-eating crabs, it did not take long for their spears to be broken and their bodies to be pierced. Even his mount couldn't escape the fate of being beheaded. In less than 10 minutes, as if they had calculated the time, after the 5-man adventure team had cleaned up all the Metsbaratana on the ship, the banana boat had reached the opposite shore. Jarlaxle changed his form once again. Even the clothes on his body became the same as the matriarch of the first family. He led several cobras down the ship, and the orcs and goblin boatmen who were lingering on the shore didn't dare to approach. Without the permission of the drow matriarch, if a vassal race like them rashly boarded a family ship, even if it was to drag the ship into the anchorage and do some cleaning work, it would still be a crime to be punished. When they got off the ship, Keyes found that Calder was smiling as he hid small hourglasses all over the ship. The young blue dragon glanced at them and knew that the sand in the hourglasses had been enchanted. As long as the hourglasses ran out, they would turn the ship into a roasted banana. The soul-binding tower is in front. There were no drow around, so Jarlaxle simply used words that a few people could understand. He pointed to a pyramid-shaped building in front of them and said softly. It was originally a huge stalagmite that grew on the ground. Its shape was similar to a pyramid. According to the habit of the Dark Elves, they would usually use the stone-to-mud spell to turn it into a spider-shaped temple. However, the wandering drow clan had abandoned the faith of Lolth. Under the command of those blasphemous priests, the sorcerers simply turned it into a pyramid. A few people slowly walked forward, and a group of patrolling drow began to appear at the main entrance of the pyramid. However, when they saw Jarlaxle, who was disguised as the matriarch of Metsbaratana, they all bowed and quickly left with the members of the adventure team. The position of the Metsbaratana family is very awkward. According to the customs of the drow, the first family will have supreme authority in the underground city. But now the real power is held by the blasphemous priests, and the daughter of the Spider Queen, Lavix, who is said to want to usurp the power of the Demon King's pit. With the suppression of these two forces, the matriarch of Metsbaratana's right to speak is actually not much different from the other matriarchs. In order to guard against her, the leader of the blasphemous priests, Slotak, has repeatedly made things difficult for the Metsbaratana family. As they spoke, they walked into the main entrance of the pyramid. Now, the people in the underground city are restless. Everyone thinks that a war will break out in the near future. At this time, no one wants to be too close to the first family. At this point, Jarlaxle immediately switched to the soul language mode to explain. Are we going to sneak in like this? The investigation definitely needs a result. In the end, we will definitely have to go to the core of the spirit binding tower to take a look. Maybe there will be a battle. If that happens, can we still go back the way we came? Do you have any plans? Let me hear them. Calder's voice came from the soul language channel like a string of cannons. Jarlaxle was shocked by the sudden words. He thought that only he and Keyes could talk using the soul language. Halflings are born with the gift of the soul. It is hidden in their blood and can only be discovered by chance. Keyes timely sent a message to the mercenary leader alone. Since the other party always liked to overthink, he had to appease him. In a world called a Das, the ancient halflings relied on the power of the soul to create an extremely glorious civilization. You have just used the soul language several times and Calder has heard it a few times. It is normal for the gift to be awakened. Understood, Jarlaxle replied. Keyes continued, however, what he said is also a problem. I don't know what you think, but I think that since we have already sneaked into the spirit binding tower, I think there is no harm in using a more radical method of sneaking. As long as no one sees us, then we can be considered to be in perfect stealth. At worst, we can just make all the witnesses disappear. And this way, we don't have to worry about being surrounded when we go out. Jarlaxle, what do you think? After listening to Keyes' words, the mercenary leader instantly came back to his senses. His bald head that was covered by magic was instantly covered in a layer of cold sweat. Good guy. So it was the kind of perfect stealth where no one sees us. This, logically speaking, was indeed impeccable. As you wish, Jarlaxle replied obediently. Chapter 966. Under the arrangement of Keyes, the adventurer team entered the core area of the spirit binding tower. Even if no one raised any questions, the others knew that the final outcome of this stealth game had already been decided. Either it was a complete success or a complete failure. No matter how carefully he evaluated the strength of the young blue dragon, Jarlaxle believed that the latter's probability was infinitely close to zero, so he had nothing to worry about at this time. Marsh Fezzik had no opinion about the current adventure at all. This orc had originally hoped to make a big move. If he succeeded, not only would he be promoted in the honor system set up by the Chamber of Commerce, but he might also obtain the inheritance of the Fezzik family. Gurindo Millennium the Digger was a believer of Moradin and Demarson. He was a warrior born to guard and fight, and death did not scare him. Compared to investigating, directly thwarting the conspiracy of the drows and demons was actually more in line with his taste. As for Calder, he was mainly driven by curiosity. At this moment, the great trap master's mind was filled with the possibility of discovering some novel traps in this spirit-binding tower. Fear was rarely an emotion that appeared in the minds of halflings. They were a race that was always driven by curiosity. Therefore, at certain times, they would always show a kind of courage that bordered on recklessness. At this moment, the adventurer team's goal was the same. They moved quickly at the bottom of the spirit-binding tower and continued to move deeper into the darkness, which was the core of the entire magic tower. Moreover, it did not seem difficult because there were shadows everywhere, and there were no guards, and the clanking sound from the peripheral construction site was enough to cover any noise. No drow family would expect a surprise attack, or no matriarch would be willing to get involved in the construction activities organized by the blasphemous priests when she was busy organizing the army. Therefore, the security of the spirit-binding tower was not at its strongest state. There, Jarlaxle whispered, and sneaked along the wall with a few people to the foyer of the courtyard building. Calder touched the stone door lightly to check for traps, although he felt that any trap set here would be a magic trap, and it might not be discovered until it detonated in front of him, but he still wanted to try. To his surprise, the door suddenly rose upward and disappeared into a crack at the top. The entrance opened, revealing a narrow and dim corridor. He looked back at his teammates and shrugged, indicating that there should be no other traps. At least, there shouldn't be any near the entrance hall. Then, he strode in. Like a chef who was good at playing with pufferfish, the great framer would always be the first to try a trap after disarming it. However, they couldn't relax for long. Suddenly, they heard a deep, guttural shout. Perhaps it was questioning them. Suddenly, a humanoid monster appeared in front of them. This huge humanoid creature was covered in muscles. It was 7 feet tall and 5 feet wide like the corridor. He came from the other end of the corridor, almost completely blocking the already dim light. His large stature and bull-like head revealed his identity. "This is not a trap," the halfling explained in a low voice, then ran to the back of the team. He was not good at dealing with traps that were not traps, especially when there was no time to set them up. The other members of the adventurer team did not blame Calder. Dealing with a Tauren was not the job of a great framer. Moreover, without any good equipment, there was nothing much to see about killing such a monster. "He's asking for the password," Jarlaxle said in a low voice. "Do you know?" Keyes asked. The mercenary leader took off his hat awkwardly and scratched his bald head. The spell item's time was up, and he returned to his original appearance from the matriarch of House Metz Baratana. "Even the Dayat mercenary group can't find out everything. Watch me," the orc druid said, and then took the lead to walk towards the Tauren. "Justin Beb. Justin Beb. Justin Beb. Yuru. Doss," Marsh Fezzik stammered, jingling the pouch on his belt. "Doss." The Tauren took half a step back and raised his head. "What's he saying?" Calder asked Keyes in a low voice. In his opinion, since this gunslinger was an investigator of the scale of perpetual order, he must be very knowledgeable. "I don't know," the young blue dragon admitted honestly, because the Tauren language the orc spoke was terrible. It was almost incoherent, but he thought he had just mentioned the word gift. Marsh Fezzik gave the Tauren a gift. When he was close enough to the monster, he took out a straw from his belt. The Tauren looked at the orc druid with some doubt. He originally thought that this little green-skinned man was going to bribe him with something good. "Who?" He gently put the straw in his mouth and blew, and the steel needle inside suddenly shot out. Because it was close enough, it easily pierced through the Tauren's thick skin and poured all the liquid in the poison sac into the monster's body. Plop. Beezeezeezy. Clang, the Tauren tilted his head and his body collapsed to the ground. The horns on his head came into close contact with the wall, and finally hit a rock and broke into two pieces. The venom taken out from the poison gland of the greenfoot dragon snake was basically a shot to kill creatures that were not immune to the paralysis effect. Next, the adventurer team encountered a few more Tauren guards in the passage, one after another. Marsh did the same to all of them. Deceit, approach, blow the needle. Until the guard became a drow, Marsh's job was taken over by Jarlaxle. "Good day, my friend." The mercenary leader took off his hat and greeted the acquaintance he met. He knew the drow in front of him. The other party's name was Drowage. He was the father of the matriarch of the Metz Baratana family, whom he had pretended to be. At the same time, he was also the family's martial arts master. However, this Drowage was not the kind of drow that Jarlaxle liked. In fact, Jarlaxle even had some doubts about whether this guy was a real drow. He was 6 feet tall when he stood up, and his strong muscles added up to nearly 200 pounds. He was the most valiant dark elf in the Wandering clan, and also the largest of his kind that Jarlaxle had seen so far with a slender body. The difference between this violent martial arts master and other drow was definitely not only in body size. Jarlaxle's behavior was generally recognized as strange, but Drowage was terrifying, ugly from the drow's aesthetic point of view. He cut his white hair short and used a thick gel extracted from boiling the flesh of the loath beast to bind it. A silver ring went through Drowage's angular nose, and a gold pin protruded from each side of his cheeks. Chapter 967. You've crossed the line, Jarlaxle. Zhuwechi's voice was as fierce as his appearance. His weapon was a trident, not a scimitar or a longsword like any other drow. He wore a well-fitting black heavy armor, and a net, which was said to be a magical artifact, was hanging from his belt within easy reach of it. Perhaps. "But before you judge me," the mercenary leader said nonchalantly. He held a weapon in each of his hands, and a small part of his body was urging him to rush up and fight. However, Jarlaxle was still Jarlaxle. His self-control was far superior to the other dark elves. "Gondo, my old friend, must you use a spell to see through the long-range scrying mirror?" As he spoke, a green sphere hidden behind Zhuwechi floated up, and a silver-white string hung from it. Then, a male drow appeared in the passage, holding the string as if he was sliding down a rope. "Long time no see, Jarlaxle." Even though Gundor chose to reveal himself, he still tried his best to hide behind Zhuwake's human shield. He knew that his old friend on the other side of the passage was very skilled. Keys, who was standing behind, watched the scene with interest. Jarlaxle had said that Gondo was a member of the Dairut independent mercenary group under his command. But looking at the current situation, the loyalty of the Drow race was indeed worrying. The demonic soul pot's spell. Gondo did not hide anything and directly revealed the reason why he was here. I heard everything that stupid sister of mine told you with the help of that spell. I didn't miss a single word. So, this is your choice? Jarlaxle asked in return, but it was a declarative statement. I don't want to be your enemy, and I have no intention of getting involved with those blasphemous priests. Those bastards who don't know the secrets of magic, and only rely on their cunning and thievery to gain the ability to cast spells. However, I need their support for my research. They can give me many things that you can't. That is what every betrayer always says, in order to give himself good reason for doing so. Jarlaxle had encountered this many times before, so he wasn't surprised. Maybe not. But you did appear in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you wanted to make an enemy out of the wrong people. The mercenary leader said as he brandished his sword. His intention was self-evident. Kill him, said Gundor to Drudge. The swift and fierce Drow martial arts master let out a strange roar. He swung the trident in his hand and charged at Jarlaxle like a bull. In order to appreciate the fight, Keys couldn't help but take a few steps towards the wall of the tunnel to prevent his vision from being obstructed. Aren't we going to help him? The subterranean dwarf asked. He could tell that Zhuwechi was not an easy opponent to deal with. Let's wait and see, there's no rush. Keys patted the wailing short musket at his waist, indicating that he could draw it and attack at any time. Then he looked at Zhuwechi again. There seemed to be something wrong with this drow. He was wearing heavy armor, but he didn't wear a helmet. His face was also smeared with red and yellow paint like barbarian warriors. Although the meaning of these stripes couldn't be seen at first glance, they were clearly visible in both dark vision and normal vision. This in itself was very meaningful. Keys suspected that it was an extension of some kind of magic circle. Magic is crazy, but so is my strength. The strange martial arts master roared. He raised his arm that was full of iron-like muscles. When he bent his elbow, his biceps immediately tightened, and the rock-hard muscles on his arm even stretched the gauntlet by a circle. Akasa Gorin! Zhuwechi continued to shout. This meant Supreme Warrior in the language of the Dark Elves. Keys, who could understand the language of the Drow, and Jarlaxle, who was facing this rough man, could both hear the excessive pride in these words. Who gave you the courage? Jarlaxle held the crimson rapier and lifesaver in his hand. He pounced on his opponent like a hawk, looking as brave as the fierce drow. However, anyone who was familiar with the fighting style of this cunning mercenary leader knew that this guy's fighting style was the same as his talking style. At least half of his moves were feints. Zhuwechi didn't block, because he was wearing heavy armor and holding a long weapon. Instead, he stabbed the trident in his hand at Jarlaxle's head. The small branch of his weapon hit the swift sword and the halfling sword's edge. The friction made a long screech, and dazzling sparks flew. However, the powerful Zhuwechi still stabbed forward with his trident. I've long hated that bald head of yours! Zhuwechi roared without restraint. His originally deep red eyes were now even redder because of the blood rush. However, when the trident hit its target, Jarlaxle's head burst like a bubble. This was just an illusion, Zhuwechi immediately realized. However, his weapon had clearly hit his opponent's weapon. He quickly understood what was going on. Below him, a figure suddenly appeared out of thin air. Jarlaxle reached out and grabbed the hilts of his two weapons. He stabbed them into Zhuwechi's groin through the gaps in his armor. Same to you. Besides, I have a problem with your entire body. The mercenary leader quickly retreated after the successful attack. At the same time, he didn't forget to mock his opponent. This was also Jarlaxle's fighting style. Feints and trash talk were all to make Shuichi lose his composure and expose more of his weaknesses. Moreover, with the 2 stabs just now, the crimson rapier could make the opponent bleed continuously, while the lifesaver could steal a small portion of the opponent's life force to heal himself and replenish his stamina. Now, the scales of victory seemed to be heavily tilted towards Jarlaxle's side. However, the premise was that there were no accidents. The mercenary leader, who had sharp eyes, looked at his opponent's groin and frowned. Unlike what he had imagined, there wasn't a pillar of blood that flowed endlessly. Keys, who was watching the battle, also noticed this. He suddenly had a guess. In order to confirm his guess, the young blue dragon who had transformed into a human rushed forward at lightning speed. He pulled away Jarlaxle, who was obstructing him in the middle of the passage with one hand, and quickly took out the wailing short musket with the other, and pulled the trigger. Yes, he didn't care about martial ethics at all. Keys only cared about the practicality. Bang bang! The 2 consecutive one-shot bullets directly blew 2 big holes in the heavy armor in front of the dark elf's chest. Looking at the injured body, Keys immediately understood. The armor you created is a little unusual. Keys tilted his head and looked past Shuichi, who was still standing to the side. He looked at the spellcaster Gondo, who had a surprised expression on his face. In order to maximize the power of the Mad Knight armor and blazing sun crystal, you even used some steel demons from the 9 prisons of Bader as the glue for these 2 items. Am I right? Chapter 968. There were too many thieves in the world who believed that the law of happiness was to happen upon an unguarded treasure. There were countless mages who searched for true power all year round. They found a magic scroll or a magic treasure, but it was far beyond their ability to understand, but they still tried regardless of the consequences, and as a result, they were destroyed by powerful magic. There were many priests in the world, as well as many devout sects, who only required obedient service for themselves and their followers. These people were destined to never find true happiness. Tripping over an unguarded treasure, an important factor was missing. When a small mage put his hand on the wand of a chief mage, an element was missing. Obedient, unquestioning, and unambitious service was also missing a very important factor. That was the sense of accomplishment. For any rational person, this was the most important factor that constituted happiness. It was this factor that built confidence and allowed people to challenge bigger tasks. It was it that helped people find a sense of self-worth, made anyone believe in the value of life itself, and gave them the willpower to support us to face the unanswerable questions in life. In the Drow society, especially for male Drow, the sense of accomplishment was not difficult to obtain. Under the hierarchy built by the Dark Elves based on gender differences, their success was too likely to be rudely robbed by the opposite sex. The ability to defend their sense of accomplishment and the opportunity to find an anchor point in life was very rare for male Drow. The Dert Independent Mercenary Group was born because they found this pain point or need. It was composed entirely of male Drow. The Drow who first formed the mercenary group were wandering Drow outside of their families. Under the leadership of Jarlaxle, they condensed into a force and became a symbol of another force in the Drow society besides their families. The Dert Independent Mercenary Group was only active in the world of Toril at first, and then gradually spread across the multiverse. It had its own branches in the Underdark of many worlds, recruiting a variety of male Drow who were capable and willing to seize a sense of accomplishment. And it itself, so far, was the greatest achievement of Jarlaxle's life. As for the wandering Drow clan in the Ashen World, it was the second voyage of the mercenary leader's life this century. The reason why his compatriots who had betrayed Loltha's glory were able to escape to the Ashen World was not only because of the blasphemous priest's leadership and the care of the Spider Queen's noble Lady Lavius, but also because of the efforts of the Dayat independent mercenary group. Jarlaxle was the one who made the great escape happen naturally. Therefore, after learning of the plans of the blasphemous priests, he had completely sided with the young blue dragon who possessed the scale of perpetual order. Loltha's worship and the sacrificial hierarchy built by the female drows could not deprive him of his sense of achievement, and neither could the demons of the 9 prisons of Bader. Therefore, he was determined to destroy the entire spirit-binding tower, no matter what stood in his way. And when he saw with his own eyes Gondo, who had betrayed him, and this seemingly capable male drow spellcaster used magic to create a guard, he felt angry. An unknown anger rose in the heart of the mercenary leader. "You made the wrong choice." Jarlaxle's hands waved quickly. Thanks to the 2 mithril magic wristguards on his wrists, his movements were always faster than others. "You made a mistake in judgment, and you have to be responsible for it." 5 flying daggers, which were called garroting blades, shot out from his hands at once. It was not magic, but Jarlaxle's unique throwing technique. They bypassed Gundor, who was a martial arts master of the Metz Baratana family, whose body had been blasted to pieces by the wailing pike, and attacked the drow sorcerer. "Ustin Sargwheel," Gondo mocked disdainfully. This sentence meant arrogant fool in the language of the Dark Elves. The drow warlock was mocking his former leader, and his confidence came from the magically modified dark elven warrior in front of him. Although there was a big hole in his chest, Zhuoweiqi could still move normally. The moment Jarlaxle raised his hand, the dark elven warlock pulled out a net from his waist and threw it behind him. This net, which was weaved from the spider's silk and enchanted with magic, opened to its largest extent in an instant. It firmly blocked the passage, and the flying daggers thrown by Jarlaxle could not pass through the gap above. Instead, they hit the net's magic, and after a flash of light, they were quickly bounced back. At the same time, Zhuoweiqi let out another roar. The armor on his chest, which had caved in from the explosion, began to bulge on its own, and the bullet embedded in it was forced out. Flesh and steel were now indistinguishable from each other. Between the gaps of the armor, hot steam was spurting out. During the modification, Zhuoweiqi was subjected to a punishment comparable to death by 1,000 cuts. Of course, there was magic to prolong his life and suppress the pain that was enough to drive him insane. His original muscles were all removed by Gundor and replaced with a few sets of flesh and muscle taken from the fanatic armor to enhance his strength and agility. The original Mad armor was only an exoskeleton system. No matter how it was designed, there was a limit to the amount of flesh it could accommodate. The crazy drow warlock used his own cruelty and imagination to solve this problem in his own way. In the end, he created a martial arts master who, at full power, had the strength of a giant even without the support of other spells. At the same time, he also had the agility of a dark elf. He was a powerful flesh and blood war machine. Not only that, but because Gondo had also successfully removed the armor of the Batsu Devil, in a sense, the armor of the Batsu Devil was its body, and fused it with Zhuoweiqi, Zhuoweiqi now had the self-regenerating ability of an underworld demon. Thanks to the flesh and blood, his regenerative ability was several times stronger than the original Batsu. The flesh and blood, the armor of the Batsu Devil, and the will of the Drow. The 3 formed a positive, optimized whole. How does he supply energy? Those flesh and blood need to absorb special nutrient fluids to recharge. He has never carried a nutrient fluid tank with him in his entire life. Keyes fell into deep thought as he watched Zhuoweiqi fight Jarlaxle. Chapter 969. The bearded martial arts master grinned, revealing his white, sharp teeth. The corners of his mouth almost reached his ears. He felt the power from the eternal poisonous fireball, the power that the Drow feared. Not long ago, Gundor chanted an incantation, and something shocking happened to the adventurer team. A closed door at the top of the tunnel suddenly opened, and the light of the eternal sun shone down from the top of the tunnel. Bathed in the sunlight, Zhuoweiqi narrowed his eyes, and the black armor on his body flickered with specks of light. I see. Keys instantly understood his doubts. He figured out how Gundor provided energy to his flesh, no longer relying on nutrient fluids, but on the blazing crystal to absorb sunlight. But this is underground. The sunlight can't bend and illuminate the entire cavern. How did he come out of that light to fight Jarlaxle? Gundor's next move once again explained the doubts of the blue dragon in human form. The drow sorcerer summoned a mirror made of crystals. The surface of the mirror was covered with jagged protrusions. He placed it directly under the sunlight shining down from the top of the passage, and the sunlight was immediately distorted by 90 degrees and shone parallel to the passage where the adventurers were. Sand crumbles. Before the subterranean digger could adjust his vision, Gorindo Millennium was dazed by the sudden deflection of the sunlight, and the dwarf let out an angry roar. Calder the halfling and Mashu the orc were also affected. Although they also had a certain degree of dark vision, it was not as strong as the subterranean digger, and so the situation was not as bad. Keys, on the other hand, was unaffected. During the battle with the Grand Vader, he had already swallowed a large amount of blazing crystals that the Grand Vader had accumulated over a long period of time. Relying on his miraculous active adaptation ability, the blue dragon had not only digested the blazing crystals, but also gained the special ability to absorb the energy of the eternal blaze for his own use. As for Jarlaxle, the mercenary leader was more miserable. His infrared vision was comparable to that of the subterranean digger, and the moment the sunlight shone on him, one of his eyeballs was as uncomfortable as being scalded by a red-hot steel rod. Why only one? That was because he was wearing a burning fear eye patch on his other eye. It was a multi-enchanted item that could, to a certain extent, prevent spiritual prying, reduce fire damage, and protect one eye from being stimulated by strong light. Every day, he would randomly put it on his left or right eye, which caused many dark elves to guess which eye he was blind in. Although he still had the strength to fight, Jarlaxle still decisively retreated. This cunning fellow would never fight an enemy without 100% certainty. Moreover, he wasn't fighting alone. There was more than one person in the team who could fight. What a slippery fellow, Keys muttered. Then, with a click, he loaded the wailing short musket. Facing the rapidly approaching Zhuoweiqi, the young blue dragon directly rushed towards him. When he passed by Jarlaxle, he grabbed him by the shoulder. Jarlaxle couldn't dodge the grab even with the cloak of illusion on him. Then, he threw Jarlaxle behind him at an even faster speed. "Leave this to me," Keys declared solemnly without looking at the dark elf who landed like a wild goose falling from the sand. Seeing the other person who appeared in front of Zhuoweiqi, Gondo sneered and whispered, "Stupid human." In his opinion, it wouldn't be long before the Prism Warrior, who dared to be fierce because of the power of his weapon, would be torn apart by the Prism Warrior that he had created. After all, Zhuoweiqi, who bathed in the sunlight, had a self-recovery ability and physical strength that even surpassed that of ordinary legendary warriors. If Keys knew the Dark Elf's thoughts, he would most likely agree with the first half of his inference. Keys did not want to expose his identity at the moment, so he had to use some powerful weapons. As for being torn to shreds? Putting aside the fact that it was impossible, in order to do that, Zhuoweiqi, the Prism Warrior that Gondo created, had to at least ensure that he could come back to life after being smashed flat. Bang, bang. Keys aimed at Zhuoweiqi's trident with the wailing short-barreled gun and fired twice, hitting the trajectory of Zhuoweiqi's attack directly into the tunnel wall. This evil weapon, with the help of its master's great strength, cut deep into the stone wall of the tunnel. Before Zhuoweiqi could pull it out, Keys held a slightly small warhammer in his left hand and smashed it at the armor of the Prism Warrior. Breaking the armor with a warhammer was the right move, but Zhuoweiqi grinned viciously. He knew how tough his armor was. not to mention whether an ordinary hammer could break it. Even if it did, it would be able to recover quickly. However, the warhammer in Keys's hand was no ordinary warhammer. It was called Hammer. Bang! Crunch! Thump, thump, thump. After hitting the target, the legendary warhammer embedded with a mice energy core immediately changed shape and returned to its original dragon head warhammer. The teeth of the Megalosaurus pierced deeply into the prism armor. Then, without needing Keys to swing it, the warhammer was like the fuel or steam warhammers developed by the scale of perpetual order. The head of the warhammer suddenly turned into a pile driver. With the first hit, Zhuoweiqi was knocked to the ground. After that, he was unable to get up again. With the energy provided by the mice energy core to squander, the dragon head warhammer used an extremely brutal frequency to continuously grind the prism warrior to the ground. No, it should be said to be smashed. In the beginning, because there was still some sunlight shining on Zhuoweiqi and the armor on his body could still recover. However, as the dragon head warhammer hammered down, the prism warrior was first smashed into the floor and then buried in the ground. There was no light at all. Blood, steel shards, broken flesh. Like the dregs splashed out of a grinder, they all gushed out of the pit where Zhuoweiqi disappeared. Fortunately, Keys dodged in time. Otherwise, he would have been splashed all over. The draconic warhammer's power was so great that it shook the entire Soul Shackling Tower and Zal Air City. That was natural. One should know that the mice energy core could easily lift a floating city even if it wasn't at full power. What happened? In his private room, the leader of the blasphemy priests, Slotak, who was having a discussion with Lavis, suddenly looked at his ally. He thought that the earthquake was a conspiracy of the Spider Queen. Chapter 970. Slotak sat facing the wall of the room, staring at a meditation basin carved out of agate stone. He squinted at the dark meditation potion and used it for divination. In addition, the blasphemy shaman had also prepared an accurate sand table of the underground city, which was placed next to the meditation basin. He cast a spell on a small feather. Slotak chanted and threw the feather into the meditation basin. It fell on the surface of the water and rippled. Then, like a bird that had just finished drinking, the feather quickly swept up and flew straight to the sand table on the left. The feather floated in the air and skimmed over the sand table. The feather, the magic pointer, slowly fell to a certain position on the sand table. Its tip pointed to a building in the underground city. Starek opened his eyes wide. How could this be? The blasphemy shaman could not believe it. Trouble had already infiltrated the spirit-binding tower that worried him the most. What were the guards doing? Where were the drow patrols at the door? Where were the Tauren, Earth Goblin, and Bugbear slave army? Are you done? The furious Spider Queen, who herself wasn't sure if she was truly angry at the indecisiveness of the castrated Earth Goblin in front of her, or if she was just acting instinctively after centuries, stood in front of the blasphemy shaman, who was in deep thought. A shining whip flew out of her sleeve and smashed the feather floating on the sand table into pieces. Starek raised his head, and the flame of the candle above his head rose 2 to 3 feet, fully expressing the mood of the blasphemy shaman. Even the worst practical action is 100 times better than sitting and thinking. Because they had done enough, and if they did more, they might be attacked, so Lavis did not continue to provoke his anger. She added a common saying of the drow elves. Starek opened his eyelids, revealing his strange yellow eyes. As you wish, noble lady. In the passageway leading to the core control room of the spirit-binding tower, the adventurer team had just stabilized themselves. They all looked at Keys in awe. Although it looked like the young blue dragon was using a powerful weapon, how could his strength be mediocre if he had such a powerful weapon? Marsh Fazak swallowed nervously. After all, this orc druid had grown up in the scale of perpetual order, so he recognized the dragon head warhammer. However, since that lord was unwilling to reveal his true identity, Marsh would not seek death by revealing this secret. Compared to the shock of the adventurer team, the drow Gondo, who was standing opposite of them, was overwhelmed with shock. When the trembling stopped, he immediately took out some rusty red iron shavings from a pocket of his robe and threw them at his feet. Iron wall! Gondo quickly chanted an incantation. Immediately after, a steel wall appeared in front of him. Although its edges were not perfectly aligned with the passageway, it was enough to prevent the enemy from passing through. This was his strategy. Gondo did not immediately summon a portal to escape because he was worried that he would be ambushed if he ran a short distance in front of the door. However, the drow seemed to have forgotten how the prism warrior was smashed into the ground. Keys waved his hand, and the hammer that had sunk into the ground flew back to his hand. In the next second, the dragon head warhammer flew forward rapidly. Bang! The dragon head warhammer smashed into the steel wall. Although Gondo's barrier was very thick and wasn't broken in one hit, the huge force still pushed it down. No! The drow cried out in despair. The wall, which weighed several tons, destroyed the teleportation door. Gondo, who was chanting a spell, did not manage to escape in time. He was smashed into the ground by the steel wall he summoned, and blood gushed out from all around him. Let's continue. Keys did not waste any effort to move the steel wall to pick up the loot that the drow might have. He heard the sound of footsteps coming from outside the passageway, and he immediately gave his opinion. As if it was natural, no one in the adventurer party objected. They continued to move forward at high speed. The few of them stepped on the collapsed steel wall and hurriedly passed by. Only the halfling Calder stopped for a moment and stuffed 2 or 3 of his own magic hourglass traps into a corner. A group of goblins and orcs quickly rushed in from outside the passageway. These humanoid creatures were the slaves of the drow, who ordered them to scout the way. After all, compared to the drow, their lives were not worth mentioning. Originally, in the evaluation system of the Dark Elves, the Earth Goblins should be the same as these humanoid slaves. However, because the current rulers of the Wandering Drow clan were blasphemous priests of the Earth Goblin race, the Earth Goblins were removed from the slave handbook. The 3 bugbears were in charge of commanding the 100 or so goblins and orcs. The bugbears were almost the largest goblin-like creatures. They were usually taller than normal humans, Earth Goblins, by a head. Their majestic bodies were like black bears that walked upright. The 3 bugbears were all covered in black fur. One of them was wielding a spiked mace, while the other was holding a round shield covered with leather. The small milky eyes on their faces were gleaming with excitement as they anticipated the bloody battle that was about to happen. Goblins, Earth Goblins, and bugbears. Although the appearance of these 3 goblins was very different, they did indeed represent an evil faction. The evil of the Earth Goblins was orderly and well-planned. They liked to form legions, war gangs, and even an entire country. The evil of the goblins was primitive and ignorant. They just liked to find ways to satisfy their evil hobby, regardless of the race of the victim or themselves. The evil of the bugbears was the purest. All their actions were to create as much pain as possible and to try to kill. The more destructive, the better. The Earth Goblins killed for orders, the goblins killed for fun, and the bugbears killed to cause as much pain as possible to the victims and bystanders. Not only did they want to kill, but they also wanted to satisfy themselves and make others tremble. Kill, kill, kill! The leading bugbear sniffed. There was a large piece of broken floor in the passageway, and there was a collapsed iron wall not far ahead. Both places emitted a somewhat fascinating smell of blood. The monster could not help but lick his lips with his tongue. He raised his spiked mace and roared loudly. Right ahead, right ahead! He urged his companions as well as those around him. These guys swarmed forward, not noticing that some small hourglasses nearby had completely run out of sand. Chapter 971. Kukukuku, the halfling framer, couldn't help but laugh when he heard the roar and the loud explosion behind him. Sorry, I've been through strict training. I don't usually laugh, Calder explained awkwardly when he saw his teammates looking at him. "Unless I can't help it." They walked into the core secret room of the soul-binding tower. Several hundred meters behind them was an inferno of flames. The dark elves were commanding the strong minotaurs to carry the goblins and orcs that had been turned into human-shaped torches to somewhere less troublesome. As for receiving treatment, those unlucky people could forget about it. Their only chance of survival was to hope that their lives were tough enough. These idiots. A high-grade drow sorcerer had just finished casting a spell. She used magic to neutralize the flames, and the passage became accessible for the team to move forward. This team, made up entirely of drows and taurens, stepped on the skeletons of the slaves and moved forward quickly. The bones of the 3 leading earth spirit bugbears had been crushed by some unknown minotaurs. The adventurer team entered the core of the spirit-binding tower. The style here was completely different from that of the drow culture. There were no stalactite wall decorations that had been shaped by magic, nor were there gorgeous tapestries. There was only gold leaf that wrapped the whole room. No wonder. Jarlaxle immediately understood. Previously, this wandering drow clan had actively amassed wealth with the help of several corrupted Khedive. Many drow, including him, thought that it was mainly to collect gold so that they could smelt more adamantine ingots and upgrade their weapons. But in fact, through trading, extortion, and threats, although the wandering drow clan used many means to collect thousands of gold drow from the Medici Empire, considering the purchasing power of gold drow and their excellent quality, this was definitely a huge fortune. The gold did not seem to be fully used to upgrade weapons. Only the equipment of the matriarchs of several clans were replaced. Jarlaxle had originally thought that this was due to the greedy nature of the Dark Elves. However, as soon as he entered the secret room, he knew that he had made a wrong judgment. The gold had actually been fully utilized, and it was even insufficient. The whole secret room was filled with a lavender luster, which was like the tone of the drow nobles. However, it wasn't the demonic fire summoned by magic that lit up this place, but a magical device that floated in the middle of the room. It was like a lavender eye. Countless strands of golden threads stretched out from the walls in all directions, connecting to the huge eye as if they were strands of optic nerve. What formed the giant eye was pure energy. To be precise, it was a special kind of magical energy. Thanks to his years of study, Keyes recognized that it was soul energy. They really put in a lot of effort. The young blue dragon could not help but sigh. However, the capital he was talking about was not the gold in the room, but the huge eyeball in the middle of the eye. If he was not mistaken, the probability of this happening was almost zero. It was the core that gathered soul energy. It was a polished spherical perfect soul prism that was as long as an adult's arm. If the soul prism was the common currency of the lower realm, then the perfect soul prism was the most valuable hard currency. The value of such a large perfect soul prism was estimated to be equivalent to tens of thousands of normal soul prism. That was equivalent to tens of thousands of souls. If the difficulty of polishing it was taken into account, the price of this perfect soul prism would definitely be several times higher. Compared to this perfect soul prism that was definitely worth more than 3 million calamity coins, the gold foil and golden threads in this secret room were somewhat insignificant. Just as Keyes was pondering, a portal shining with a light blue light suddenly appeared near the adventurer team. They hurriedly retreated a distance away. A graceful drow and a strange-looking earth goblin walked out of the portal. That earth goblin is the leader of the blasphemous sacrifice, Slotak, and that female drow is the noble daughter of the Spider Queen. Jarlaxle recognized them and immediately reminded everyone in the telepathic language. However, the two people who appeared in this secret room obviously recognized the mercenary leader from his extremely recognizable appearance. Lavis let out an angry shout, "Jarlaxle, you bastard!" Her voice seemed to be angry and resentful. If one did not know the reason behind it, one might imagine that there was a love and hatred between the two drow. But in fact, Jarlaxle was fine. He did not have any special feelings for the other party. Lavis only wanted to kill the mercenary leader thousands of times to compensate for the pain of her own death. "Leader of Dayet, you have crossed the line," Sterek said in a low voice. His voice was as choppy as a scythe cutting through a whetstone, causing one's eardrums to go numb. However, these two seemed to be too focused on Jarlaxle to the point that they ignored the others. Keyes raised the muzzle of his wailing short pistol. He did not aim at the two enemies, but pretended to inadvertently fire at the magic eye in the middle of the room. Bang bang! Double shots were fired, and 2 bullets flew towards the perfect soul prism. This scene scared the candle flame on Sterek's head. Sadder, fortunately, this blasphemous priest chanted an incantation almost at the same time as the gunshot. In an instant, he displayed the power he stole from the gods and summoned an abyssal tarantula the size of a pot lid. It blocked the magic eye and the bullets. Without a doubt, before it could figure out why it was summoned, the unlucky spider turned into a pile of mud. At the same time, Lavis completed her casting. This noble lady of the Spider Queen also summoned some creatures. After dying once, she knew how dangerous Jarlaxle was. Although the mercenary leader was not an assassin, he was definitely the strongest assassin Lavis had ever seen. Therefore, she swore that she would not face this opponent alone. Relying on her own operation in the abyss, this noble lady of the Spider Queen summoned a Glabrizu and half a dozen Babu demons. The former was a powerful monster that was 20 feet tall and had 4 arms, while the latter was the most common assassin expert in the abyss. There was a tank in the front, an assassin in the back, and 2 spellcasters, Lavis and Sterek, as well as a group of elite dark elves who were about to reach this secret room. Lavis had a feeling that this wave should be in the bag. However, she forgot one thing. Casually raising a flag before the battle was over was definitely not beneficial. Reloading the wailing short musket with 2 unique special bullets, Quest fired at the Glabrizu, then casually aimed at a barb demon and fired a second time. Chapter 972. Some people often had the misconception that they were at the center of the world, that the world revolved around them, and that they could revolve around them. People called this kind of thinking arrogance or self-righteousness. Arrogance would make people easily ignore the probability of failure, and self-righteousness would make people blindly certain that they were right. For example, after summoning more than half a dozen Tana Re-demons, the Spider Queen thought that there was no suspense in the battle. This was definitely a kind of blind confidence. In the end, Keyes reversed the situation in the blink of an eye. 2 specially made bullets exploded. The smell of smoke and sulfur instantly rose in this secret room. The snake-scorpion demon Nimaku appeared in front of the Glabrizu without any warning, and a Hamar demon appeared in the group of barb demons. Whoosh! The Glabrizu's 4 arms, which were shaped like crab claws, smashed towards the opponent that appeared in front of him. His jackal-like head revealed a sinister smile. However, this smile froze in the next second. The snake-scorpion demon's hands were imbued with a malicious transformation technique, and it instantly pierced through the hard shell of the Glabrizu's claws and twisted them out of shape. The natural weapon that demons were most proud of was instantly torn out of its shell. Although the Glabrizu was no longer a weak Tana Re-demon, it still couldn't compare to a high-level Batsu demon like the snake-scorpion demon. In just one exchange, his strength had been crippled by at least 80 to 90%. Crab demon! Nimaku roared. Even if the snake-scorpion demon wasn't keen on bloody battles, as a demon, when he saw a demon, he still had a monstrous killing intent. Burn or steam, choose your fate. The Hamar demon that was released by Keyes from the Master Ball bullet also had a similar feeling. The demon covered in spikes opened his arms and gave a warm hug to a barb demon in front of him. Blood spurted out from the demon's body. Then, as the Hamar demon shook at a high speed, the Tana Re-assassin that didn't have time to hide was immediately cut into pieces. his body was instantly subjected to the punishment of death by 1,000 cut. This evil demon, who was as thin as a human skeleton and covered in acidic mucus, did not have much flesh on its body. After being tortured by the Hamama, it only took a few seconds for it to turn into a skeleton. Then, the Hamama used its sharp claws to brutally break its neck. The pleasure of slaughtering demons was an irresistible pleasure for any demon. It was a tradition engraved in their blood. After killing a barb demon, the excited Hamar even forgot about its spell-like abilities. He was like a real beast, sticking close to the ground as he scurried towards another barb demon. The barb demon's invisibility was useless against him. Nemoku first glanced at the rapidly retreating Glabrizu, then glanced at the Hamar who was chasing after the Babu demons. The cunning devil grinned, then his scarlet lips moved twice. He used his innate spell-like ability to summon a group of fresh troops from the 9 prisons of Bader. 4 barb demons appeared in the midst of the barb demons that were being chased by the Hamar. And immediately he used this ability again. The snake scorpion could use the Batsu summon twice a day. Once again, he summoned 4 barb demons to chase after the barb demons. These devils were covered in crimson scales, wearing breastplates and chainmail. They skillfully brandished fierce-looking machetes. A large number of twisted and terrifying barbs covered their bodies below their big mouth. It was a frightening sight. The barb demons were the elite infantry of the 9 prisons of Bader. Because they had to undertake bloody combat missions all year round, these devils were very proficient in hunting demons. And because these demon assassins were one of the opponents they often encountered in the past, the barb demons were very proficient in killing them. Their appearance made the Hamar lose the opportunity to fight, depriving him of the fun. 9 prisons, Nemoku, do you dare to be more despicable? The Hamar cursed loudly. At the same time, he couldn't help but speed up his hunting of the remaining barb demons in order to protect his remaining fun. However, although this devil was unhappy, he wasn't stupid enough to get involved in the battle between the snake-scorpion demons and the Glabrizu demons. Not to mention whether or not Nemoku would take the opportunity to kill him. When that guy found out that he was Balzeb's informant, he already had the intention to kill Hamadok, and wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. The strength of the Glabrizu was also slightly stronger than him. The Hamar didn't want to get into trouble. Thus, the fun of fighting the Glabrizu demons was enjoyed by Nemoku alone. Facing the Glabrizu demons that were more than twice his height, but their weight was limited, this bloated high-ranked Batsu demon fully demonstrated the law of Master Spellcaster is your Master Spellcaster. All kinds of spells that could be cast at will continuously hit the Glabrizu demons as if they didn't cost money. The latter could only occasionally cast the Hammer of Chaos while being beaten up, and also through the magic power at the snake-scorpion demons. However, this kind of attack didn't have much lethality when it landed on Nemoku's body after encountering the magic barrier of Protection of Chaos. After being hit by the Hammer of Chaos, the snake-scorpion demons would only feel a slight numbness at most, and the fat on his body would tremble slightly. Apart from that, the Glabrizu demons couldn't cast any spells that required slightly more complicated casting movements and incantations. Even if he wanted to cast his innate spell to summon demon helpers, the snake-scorpion demons would accurately cast an advanced dispel magic when he wanted to cast it. Like a cat playing with a mouse, the snake-scorpion demons constantly destroyed their Glabrizu demons. After suffering a series of failures in the past few days, Nemoku could finally breathe a sigh of relief. What should we do? Lavis quickly gestured to Slotak. Her left thumb poked down forcefully, which represented a question mark in the sign language of the Dark Elves. When Keys summoned the Batsu demon with bullets, the eyes of the Spider Queen and the leader of the blasphemy priests almost popped out of their eye sockets. They were almost besieged by the adventurers. Fortunately, the allied army formed by the Drows and Taurens rushed in from the passage in time, and they quickly hid behind their own people. Because a large number of blasphemy priests and Drows were on the way, This army was now only confronting the adventurers. Yes, it was a confrontation. More than 150 dark elves, including more than 30 cave lizard knights, plus 24 Tauren heavy infantry, were now confronting their opponents. Chapter 973. Slotak took out a diamond. He had once spent at least 200 gold drogos on this gem. Audiobook, he said to Lavis in a tone of certainty. He was talking about a powerful magic grandmaster who was famous for twisting magic energy into various shapes. Although the spells invented by that mage were lacking in detail, they were indeed unique in terms of durability and power. But looking at the adventurer team that didn't have many people to begin with, Slotak couldn't help but hesitate whether he should waste such a precious treasure. He tapped the diamond between his fingers and inconspicuously put it back into his pocket. Then, he took out a piece of crystal. Audiobook, he said again. Blasphemy priests didn't cast spells like warlocks or mages. They usually needed to complement each other with incantations, casting gestures, and spell materials. Warlocks might be better. The reason why they could mobilize magic energy was because they stole an extremely small part of the authority from the god. Their casting process, to be honest, was very similar to the process of shopping from a vending machine. Choose the right product, spell, put in money, casting materials, and click the confirm button, read the name of the spell. Then, everything could be handed over to the vending machine, the authority of the gods. Because any god had the power to change reality, even for some gods who didn't wield the authority of magic, as long as it didn't exceed a certain limit. Just like how you couldn't count on the god of orcs, Gyush, to cast Karsi's investiture of the gods could easily cast some simple spells. Audiobook's frozen magic ball was naturally included in this. When Slotak, the leader of the blasphemy priests, chanted the name of the spell, the small piece of crystal in his hand disappeared. A crystal-clear magic ball instantly appeared above the head of the snake-scorpion demon who was constantly torturing the Glabrizu. Nemoka's movements were out of shape in an instant. Frost climbed onto the joints and muscles of the greater demon like a snake. The Glabrizu wasn't affected. This Thanner re-demon from the bottomless abyss seized the opportunity and punched the snake-scorpion demon's fat face. The two demons began to fight each other at close range. Not only that, but some other blasphemy priests and drows also began to cast their spells. One of them took out a hemp rope and summoned a magical rope to bind the barb demons summoned by the snake-scorpion demons. Another put on snakeskin gloves inlaid with sharp nails and used Bigsby's grappling palms to catch the Barma demons that were charging towards them because they were obstructed from killing the barb demons. Another took out a small tin bucket, but that fellow was slapped by Slotak. "Idiot, don't use the earth-splitting spell," Slotak growled angrily. "Don't destroy this secret room." Most of the remaining spellcasters began to buff their warriors with more buff spells. Bull's Strength, Bear's Endurance, Cat's Grace, Owl's Insight, Lion's Courage. This was similar to the treatment enjoyed by the Army of the Scale of Perpetual Order. However, most of the spellcasters here were unable to cast AoE buff. They could only enchant a few powerful warriors. Just as these guys were preparing for the attack, Keys's adventurer team was also having a discussion. However, the only one who took the motley crew seriously was the dwarven underground digger. The others either knew or had roughly guessed the identity of the young blue dragon, or were simply naive optimists who didn't take the enemies in front of them seriously. "Charge out," Galindo Millennium suggested. But his companions looked at him. They did not understand. "The way of the dwarves," he explained. "When there is no way out, lower your head and charge out." Jarlaxle stole a glance at Keys and found that he had just taken out a piece of parchment and was writing and drawing. He was carefully describing the various structures of the magic eye in the center of the House of Gold. The mercenary leader quickly rejected the dwarf's suggestion. "There are too many of them. It's not easy to charge out. I guess the reason why they haven't attacked yet is because they are blocked by the monsters that Mr. Keys has just summoned. Secondly, they are afraid of destroying the structure of the secret chamber. And we can take advantage of this. Bearded gnomes, the dwarf muttered softly, but he did not deny the dark elf's words. So, shall we start the destruction here? Let's see if we can get them to open up a path? Hearing the word destruction, the halfling framer Calder's eyes lit up. He took out a paper bag from one of his small pouches, and the sound of stones colliding with each other could be heard. Now, let's do something exciting. After that, without waiting for the others to question, Calder took out 4 stones from the paper bag. This halfling's fingers were more agile than most thieves in the world. He did not need to look. Just by the touch of his fingertips, he knew that the shape of the stones was exactly what he wanted. At the same time, he also knew their color. Red, he said. That's right. He swung his arm, and the 4 stones flew out from between his fingers. They crossed a distance of dozens of yards and landed among the Tauren heavy infantry in the front row of the wandering Drow clan's army, and then exploded. Rumble, blasting stone, the essential core of many ingenious traps. He winked at the dwarf beside him, and threw a new blasting stone into the dwarf's hand. The startled Grinder hurriedly let go of the shield and battle axe in his hand, and carefully used his palm to support the dangerous object that seemed like it could explode at any time. The stone will shatter, you're going to. Before he could say the word murder, the dwarf immediately sucked in a cold breath. He was so nervous that he did not have time to react when his toe was hit by the heavy shield. The halfling smiled at him embarrassedly, then bent down and used both hands to pick up the dwarf's battle axe. "Lend it to me," Calder said. He then picked out a few more stones from the craft paper bag, but these stones did not have edges. Instead, they looked like flat stone pancakes. "This is a gift from the kind Earth Elemental Senior Monarch Sunis to the world. Many of the guard traps I set up before used them. If I have to give them a name, I'll call them Origin Stones. It's a homophone, ha ha ha." Calder didn't know what he was thinking, but he actually laughed to himself. However, his hands were not idle. He placed the stones on the ground and smashed them one by one with the dwarf's battle axe. Earth-yellow smoke drifted out of the oars in an instant, and a sharp stalagmite quickly grew out of each broken oars. The halfling quickly jumped back, but the stalagmites were still growing at a speed that should not have appeared in nature. In the end, they turned into elemental creatures. "Go fight them!" Calder excitedly pointed at the wandering Drow army. The earth elemental creatures seemed to understand the halfling's words in an instant, although they did not, and they moved forward in the direction he pointed. Every step the enormous elemental creature took would produce a rumbling sound similar to the explosion that had just occurred. Chapter 974. Small Guy Do Big Things. Keys glanced at Calder's actions and made a victory gesture to his fellow adventurer. Then, he once again immersed himself in the work of tracing the magic eye in the middle of the House of Gold. Although this spirit-binding tower was destined to be destroyed, the knowledge that built its core should not be buried. He was going to record it down and make it part of his collection. The others also looked at the great framer in a new light. Even Grinder Millennium, who originally thought that his side was at a disadvantage in terms of numbers, had to admit that in the face of the 7 or 8 fearless and over 15 feet tall rock giants, it seemed that the wandering drows were the ones at a disadvantage. The leader of the Dark Elf mercenaries, Jia, even added a new content to his life motto. Never underestimate any halfling that looks harmless. Jarlaxle silently remembered this motto in his heart. "I'll show off my skills too." Seeing that his companion was praised by the Lord, the orc druid Marsh Fezzik immediately thought and quickly put his thoughts into action. He took out a small obsidian pendant. In the middle of the obsidian, there was a piece of amber that seemed to be wrapped in brown-yellow silk. As he chanted instead of the usual summoning chant of the druids, a small but ferocious-looking 8-legged beast suddenly walked out of a cloud of yellow-green smoke. Under its golden fur were strong muscles and muscles. A gold-swallowing beast. Seeing this fierce little monster, the dwarf digger Grinder Millennium was the first to react. Out of instinct, the traditional dwarf pointed his shield and axe at the monster, but then he remembered the characteristics of the little monster, so he quickly hid his metal weapons behind his back and tried to hide behind Marsh Fezzak's body. Hopefully, that druid is more reliable. The dwarf thought to himself. The gold-swallowing beast was an aggressive creature. Except for the mating stage, they were basically alone for their whole life. Adult gold-swallowing beasts regarded the area 1 to 2 miles around their nest as their hunting ground and mercilessly drove away other hunters. In addition to fresh meat, gold-swallowing beasts liked to gnaw on metals, especially gold and copper, but it was unknown whether it was to sharpen their teeth or for nutritional needs. The metal-swallowing beast's lair could extend for thousands of feet, often deep underground. The greedy appetite of the gold-swallowing beasts earned them the nickname of Gold Engorger among the dwarves, and because of these dangerous beasts, the dwarves lost more than one miner. However, even though the gold-swallowing beast was very dangerous, there were still some dwarves who would spend a lot of money to buy their cubs and train them from young. This was because after they grew up, they could easily hunt down the more despicable rust monsters. Some dwarven clans would feed the gold-swallowing beasts with less pure gold, so that they would willingly help the dwarves guard the storage room where the steel weapons were stored. Don't worry, Cha-Cha won't be interested in your equipment, at least not here. The orc druid walked up and patted the furry head of the gold-devouring beast. This metal-swallowing beast was only 3 feet long, but it weighed over 200 pounds. This was because its entire body was filled with muscles and heavy, tough bones. Its fur was golden and its claws were black. There's more food here that it's interested in. Marsh Fezzak looked back at the dwarven underground digger and said with certainty. The metal-swallowing beast also opened its mouth and let out a roar similar to that of a leopard cat, indicating that it was indeed so. The druid whispered a few words in its ear, and the little monster actually nodded after hearing it, and then quickly ran to the corner of the House of Gold. Not only was that place far away from the confrontation between the adventurer team and the wandering drow clan, but even the battle between the demons and the demons did not affect that place. Soon, the members of the adventurer team all understood why it was called Cha-Cha. It began to gnaw on the gold foil stuck to the wall. Its hard and sharp teeth gnawed on the gold foil, and a large piece was torn off at once. And if it bit on the stone wall behind the gold foil, the latter did not seem to be harder than a cake. As it continued to gnaw, its teeth would make a crunching sound as it chewed on the metal. If a visual analogy had to be made, then the gold foil was like dust, and the metal-swallowing beast was like a vacuum cleaner robot. With its 8 powerful legs, it firmly clung to the wall and swallowed the gold foil with great efficiency. When it encountered the gold strands that connected the wall to the magic eyeball in the middle of the room, it swallowed them like noodles. The metal-swallowing beast's gnawing efficiency was so fast that a considerable area of gold foil on the wall was soon swallowed into its stomach. Fortunately, Keys had just finished drawing the magic circle on the surrounding wall. If the two were done at the same time, the young blue dragon's drawing speed would probably not be faster than the metal-swallowing beast's gnawing speed. "Stop the metal-swallowing beast!" Slotak roared with his eyes wide open. The leader of the blasphemy priests not only heard the noise made by the metal-swallowing beast, but also saw the mottled wall after the gold foil was missing. "Attack, attack, clean up all those guys!" The candle-headed earth goblin ordered loudly. Then, he took out a short dart smeared with wasp and viper venom and threw it in the direction of the metal-swallowing beast. Melf's acid arrow. As soon as the short dart was thrown, it turned into a long arrow made of yellow-green liquid. This strong acid could not corrode the gold foil on the wall, but it had a great restraining effect on the metal-swallowing beast. The acid burned off their beautiful, metallic hair, leaving ugly bald spots on their fur. He didn't use spells such as scorching metal or rusting spell. These spells worked directly on metal and had no effect on the metal-swallowing beast. It could be seen that Slottek was quite accomplished in the field of magic, and he had seen enough. Seeing the Melf's acid arrow approaching, the metal-swallowing beast, Cha-Cha, was so scared that its hair stood on end. It quickly swung its 8 strong legs and ran far away on the gold foil wall, avoiding the spell that might disfigure it. Then, it looked at the orc druid Marsh Fezzik with dissatisfaction and roared again, as if it was blaming its own poop picker for not blocking the arrow for it. At the same time, the earth elemental creature summoned by the halfling with the stone was also fighting with the Taurens and dark elves. Calder immediately moved his eyes away from the metal-swallowing beast. Wherever there was a big commotion, he would go there. Chapter 975. There was no magic, no divine spells. When the Taurens and the earth elemental creatures collided, it was purely a contest of strength. The earth elementals summoned by Calder were all heavy and stubborn creatures made of stone or mud. When they were completely still, they looked like a pile of stones or a small hill. When the earth elementals began to move slowly, in fact, their movements could still make some changes. Although they might not be as agile as other elemental creatures of the same size, they were not slow when attacking. These earth elementals were not all the same in appearance. They looked like land animals made of stone, mud, or even crystal, with diamond-like eyes. Among them, the larger earth elementals often had the appearance of a stone humanoid creature, which looked more hard. On the other hand, the smaller earth elementals had traces of plant growth on some parts of their bodies. They did not have the same armor and weapons as the Taurens. The earth elementals relied on their own bodies to defend and attack. Not only did they have many sharp flints on the surface of their bodies, but they could also easily perform terrible blows. The Taurens waved their axes or halberds and hit them on the earth elementals. Sometimes they could only knock off some stone fragments, and sometimes they happened to break some important parts of their bodies. But as long as the earth elementals stood on the ground, those injuries would be healed. There were also some Taurens who wanted to push them down, but at this time, those monsters would discover how deceptive the appearance of the earth elementals was. They did not care at all whether it was their buttocks or their heads that fell on the ground. At worst, they could just randomly change their appearance to solve the problem. Every time a Tauren warrior pushed down an earth elemental, they would immediately find that the creature would stand in front of them in a different form. Disperse these elemental creatures. The Drows and the blasphemy priests knew how to deal with the elemental creatures and began to put their ideas into action. More than 20 Taurens alone could not defeat, or more accurately, could not defeat in a short time, these creatures that came from the inner elemental plane to the material plane. The power that supported their movements was the magic that surged from their bodies. Unless they found the magic gem that was usually hidden in the core of their bodies, they could not be completely killed. Of course, the army of Zhuor's wandering clan was not without merit. After carefully assessing the situation, the Dark Elves immediately circled around the battlefield of the Taurens and Earth Elementals, as well as the demons and devils. They attacked the real threat, preparing to deal with the adventurer team that Keys had formed. "Prepare for battle," Galindo Millennium shouted. This dwarf digger, who had been through a lot of training, was able to distinguish the vibration of a specific frequency when a drow stepped on the ground from the messy footsteps in the House of Gold. That was the unique combat footwork of the drow's martial arts. Most of the foreign races who had seen it did not have the chance to tell others what had happened to them, because they had all died in assassination attempts. Dang dang, raising the shield in his hand, Grinder's body shot out like a cannonball. 2 curved daggers appeared out of nowhere and smashed into both sides of the shield. "Caught you!" Garindo shouted excitedly. This dwarf was much heavier than the drow assassin had imagined, so the latter's attack was not able to lift the shield. Moreover, this was not the only error in judgment. Another, more serious error in judgment caused his two calves to be permanently separated from his knees. The subterranean digger used its battle axe to cut off the leg cleanly. Without support, the drow assassin screamed and fell to the ground. Born of a noble family, he wanted to use a levitation spell to escape, but Grinder was faster than him. The dwarf took 2 steps forward and smashed the armor-piercing awl on the handle of his battle axe into the drow assassin's throat. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, the other drow did not care if their companions were dead or alive. Just as Grinder was about to continue fighting, they all aimed at the digger and pulled the trigger of the crossbows in their hands. Only one arrow, coincidentally, hit the side of Grinder's thigh, where his defense was slightly lacking. The dwarf immediately felt numbness at the base of his thigh. Following that, the scene in front of his eyes began to sway, a sign that he had been hit by a paralyzing poison. Sand crumbles, the digger cursed. The reason he had the time to curse was because he wanted to thank his teammates. Seeing that Grinder had been shot, the halfling did not continue watching. The hupak staff that he usually used as a weapon and a crutch immediately turned into a large slingshot. Cauldron moved the strap of the slingshot and threw explosive rocks at the various corners where Grinder had been shot. He did not want to engage in a sniper duel with his opponent in the middle. It did not matter if his shots were not accurate, the explosions could still kill the enemy. Just as the great framer transformed into a suppressive firepower, Jarlaxle suddenly appeared beside Grinder. The mercenary leader dodged the subterranean digger's axe because he was dizzy and could not tell who Jarlaxle was. "Drink this, and you won't have to worry about the poison on the drow's crossbow anymore." As he spoke, the dark elf threw a small leather pouch to the dwarf. In a battle, there was no need to doubt him. Grinder used his teeth to bite open the cork of the leather pouch and drank the contents in one gulp. The taste of the liquid was not very friendly to dwarves, but it tasted like a mixture of grass juice and sweet fermented rice wine. As soon as it entered the dwarf's stomach, he felt a burning sensation in his originally numb wound, and then he felt pain again. Pain was much stronger than numbness. Grinder Millennium knew this simple truth. His vision was no longer dizzy. He reached out to grab the arrow in his thigh and pulled it out. Dwarves were extremely resilient creatures. Their bodies were much better than humans, so this small arrow wound would not affect them too much. It might even have formed a scab by the end of the battle. Thus, he roared and continued to rush towards the 3 drow assassins who were sneaking up on him. Seeing that their concealment had failed, they immediately shot their crossbows at Grinder again. A crossbow bolt streaked across the dwarf's cheek, but to the surprise of the drows, the dwarf did not seem to be affected by the poison. In fact, there was still pain, but the scorching pain stimulated Grinder's desire to fight. The subterranean digger brandished its battle axe and turned into a monster like a meat grinder, quickly chopping the drows into pieces. In the end, when he wanted to pull out his axe from the chest of an unlucky dwarf, he had to step on the dwarf to pull out his weapon. Chapter 976. The battle was not going well, and Sterrick was very upset. The destruction caused by the battle on the House of Gold made the Earth Goblin, who had transformed into a half-tower creature, incomplete wax demon, feel very distressed. Loltha's binding cloth, the chief blasphemy priest cursed in a low voice. He could not help but untie a leather pouch at his waist, pulled out the cork, and took a big gulp of stinky brew. This was the product of the Earth Goblin's mixing animal musk glands, rotten meat, pungent plants, and any other stinky substances together in a pot. After those things were boiled, they were mixed into a sticky alchemy paste that could be attached to anything it touched. Usually, only the Earth Goblins would drink it. Lavis, who was standing close to him, smelled the stinky brew. The Spider Queen resisted the physiological reaction of vomiting and quickly cast a detoxification spell on herself. "Are you crazy? You can launch this thing into the enemy and use it as a biological weapon, Lavis growled in disgust. She was really disgusted just now. The drow's sense of smell can't withstand such destruction. Sterek chuckled and said, maybe? The candle above his head emitted a lot of misty smoke, which changed the color and shape of the flame from orange to yellowish green. It floated above the candle wick like a fireball. Evil power gathered in the flame, and the candle began to melt and gradually covered the body of the blasphemy priest. The blasphemy priest became an incomplete wax demon. This monster with no fixed form looked like a huge melted wax block. 8 thick tentacles stretched out from the lump of flesh, and sharp knife-like teeth grew directly at the front of the giant exposed stomach. More figuratively, he now resembled an amorphous, muddy monster, looking like a melting, 7-foot-tall candle. There was a blood-red eyeball embedded in his body. 8 tentacles that looked like whips were wriggling around him, stirring up a furious storm that was spluttering noises. Judging from the appearance alone, the wax demon that Sterek had transformed into was definitely one of the stronger ones of his kind. However, there was a reason why it was called incomplete. Unlike the maids that the goddess of Lolth created with succubi in the beginning, the wax demons that the goddess of Lolth used castrated land goblins to create had a certain degree of disability. Normally, a wax demon had 4 forms: the gaseous form, the wax demon form, the spider form, and the beautiful form. But this kind of incomplete wax demon could at most turn into the first 2. They could not turn into large black widow spiders or dark elves. It was because of this that they were mercilessly abandoned by the Spider Queen, who had always been paranoid about perfection. And after sacrificing so much for the goddess, but they did not get any pity, and all the monsters led by Sterek became blasphemy priests. Take care of my things. After turning into the wax demon form, Sterek couldn't carry any of his clothes, weapons, or magic items. He used this kind of monster's innate spell to control a drow and made it put away all his things. Then, this guy rolled up a small box from his pocket with a whip-like arm and hid it in his body. Hurry up and use your evocation spells. Don't use other spells, enchantments, and the like. Don't waste my time. Using vague words, Sterek decisively issued an order to the spellcasters of the Wandering Drow clan. What the hell are you doing? Lavis scolded. Sterek ignored her. Instead, he turned into a cloud of smoke and floated to the side of the earth elementals that were fighting with the Tauren. He went into the body of the earth elemental that was the tallest and most similar to a humanoid creature. Then, he turned into a wax demon form and wantonly shuttled through the earth elemental's body. He found the magic gem that provided energy and bit it. Crack! The earth elemental disintegrated in an instant. Following his demonstration, the other blasphemy shamans all transformed into melted wax demons. Instead of using their spells to deal with the troublesome earth elemental creatures, the earth elemental creatures were quickly wiped out. At the same time, the drow sorcerers also found that it was easier for them to cast evocation spells such as fireballs and lightning. Their destructive power was also stronger. That guy is mobilizing the power of the soul binding tower. Keyes had just finished drawing the last stroke on the parchment. He keenly noticed the changes on the battlefield and inferred what tricks the opponent was using. However, the young blue dragon was also puzzled. The blasphemy priest was using the power of the soul binding tower. It was not only beneficial to the spellcasters of the Wandering Drow clan. Sterek made the magic energy in the House of Gold active, and the explosive stones launched by the halfling Calder with his slingshot were also much more powerful. Needless to say, the Tana re-demons summoned by the opponent had been wiped out. Now they had turned their attention to the snake-scorpion demons and Hamar demons. These 2 demons from the 9 prisons of Bader had almost no restrictions in using their innate spells in this environment. Even Keyes could feel the magic power in his body becoming restless. Because the total amount of magic power was too large, the increase was actually not enough, but it was still there. Strange? Keyes did not think that the opponent was unaware of this. He said to the other members of the adventurer team, "Let's retreat a little, they may be up to something." Before his voice trailed off, all the wax demons had wiped out the earth elemental creatures. Starrick then used his long whip-like arm to take out the small box that he had prepared before. He used his other arm to unscrew the lock on the box and opened it. Inside the box was a small piece of black stone. A buzzing sound rang in everyone's ears. The two sides immediately noticed a strange scene. The drow sorcerers could not use any spells. When they threw a fireball, a puff of green smoke came out of their hand. The orc druid Marsh Fezzik, who was in the form of a shark lizard, suddenly felt dizzy. His reason gradually disappeared, as if he had turned into a real shark lizard. Jarlaxle threw out his flying daggers, but the daggers that should have automatically returned to their scabbards remained in the enemy's body. The explosive stones launched by Calder with his slingshot had all turned into ordinary pebbles. Dead magic area? Keyes suddenly realized. He knew that this was not the effect of an anti-magic field spell. The blasphemy priest had temporarily turned the entire House of Gold into a dead magic area. Chapter 977. We should be able to find another stalagmite, right? Calder asked, his voice tinged with fear. The convenient traps that required magical energy to operate were all unable to be activated due to the dead magic area, and the halfling began to worry about his unknown fate. Just now, they had relied on a stalagmite to successfully take care of a tauren, but when the tauren fell to the ground, the stalagmite fell as well. "Be careful," Grinder reminded him instead of replying. As he spoke, the dwarf raised his shield and stomped on it with a huge hoof, sending the tauren flying. Grinder endured the pain from the collision, readjusted his steps, adjusted his helmet, and spat on the ground. "I found another suitable stalagmite," Grinder said loudly, and then made a throat-slitting gesture at the evil tauren, provoking him. "Now you've pissed me off, you swollen long-horned monster." The tauren was a monster that was easily angered. Although the dwarf did not tease him with a red cloth, the tauren still rushed towards Grinder with its head lowered. The dwarf immediately ran to the side, and the tauren followed closely behind him. The monster stepped into the trap without a mistake, and a rope made of elastic and tough leather was tied around the tauren's ankle. The faster he ran, the stronger the pulling force when the rope contracted. The huge pulling force caused him to trip, and his head hit the ground hard. His body was also involuntarily dragged towards the stalagmite tied to the rope. "Go to hell!" Accompanied by an angry roar, a dwarf's arrow, commonly known as a flying axe, struck the center of the tauren's cheek with a clang. The blade of the axe severed the tauren's central nervous system, causing the monster to die instantly. In the adventurer team, the two dwarves did not even have time to celebrate before they found more taurens appearing beside them. "Sandstorm!" Grinder cursed under his breath. Not only were the two of them in a tough battle, but the rest of the adventurer team was also in the same situation. Jarlaxle, the leader of the Dayet independent mercenary group, brandished his two longswords as he fought with his comrades. Although he was stronger and more agile, the number of enemies was enough to wipe out the advantage brought by his superior martial skills. Moreover, he was not used to not having the help of magic tools. Marsh, who had transformed into a shark-lizard beast, was also confronting a powerful enemy. At this moment, he didn't have much rationality left. Most of the time, he was relying on his instincts to dodge and attack. However, his opponent was even crazier than him. It was a drow in spider form. Without the restraints of magic, it could only act on its bloodthirsty impulse. Only Keyes' situation was slightly better. The wailing short musket and the electromagnetic assault rifle could still be used normally in the death magic zone. Every time he pulled the trigger, he would take the lives of one or more enemies. However, the young blue dragon also had other troubles. He didn't dare to transform into the megalosaurus form, which was more suitable for battle. Because of Steric's actions. To be honest, Keyes really didn't expect that the leader of the blasphemous priests would have a treasure that could create a death magic zone. In the center of the spirit-bound tower, the magic eye that was constructed with the perfect soul prism as the core began to emit a dark red and light red light, as if it was blinking. It was a powerful magic item by itself. The technology used to create it could very well have been borrowed from a group of 7 liches from a distant crystal wall system. They had used certain principles to create the evil divine artifact known across the multiverse, the Clinchinian broken magical crystal. Although the core of the spirit-bound tower didn't give birth to an intelligence like Clinchinian, it was just not yet and not impossible. At least, Keyes had already received a warning from the Dragon Head Warhammer. This magical weapon, named Hammer by the young blue dragon, was embedded with a complete mice energy core as its core. It possessed self-awareness, and it had just sent a warning to its master. Something's wrong. Keyes thought about Hammer's warning. Now, in the death magic zone, this magic item is like a person standing on the edge of a cliff, eager to find a way to save himself. Previously, when it was connected to the Ashen world, it attracted and digested the souls of the dead, and it had lost control of the original channel. It is building a new energy supply channel on its own. The souls of the people who died in the House of Gold, powerful magic, psionic power, all may give it inspiration. It doesn't like order. This is the aftereffect of the same manufacturing technology as Clinchinian. If it succeeds and can build an energy supply channel on its own, it is very likely that it will not obey any will, and it will grow and spread by instinct. The reminder from the Dragon Head Warhammer finally made Keyes understand. He finally understood why the ancient soul-binding sorcerer had likely mastered most of the technology to create Clinchinian, but did not give it artificial intelligence. The reason was very simple. If the core of the spirit-bound tower made with Clinchinian's technology got rid of control, it was very likely to transform into something with incredible destructive power like the naughty child. The young blue dragon, who had already regarded the Ashen world as his exclusive property, would not let the naughty child destroy this world. Therefore, he not only had to restrain his impulse to transform into a megalosaurus, as Hammer had mentioned, any spell he used here might give the core of the spirit-bound tower inspiration and complete the last step of self-reconstruction, but he also had to find a way to defuse this time bomb as soon as possible. There were enough spirit-bound towers in the Ashen world to maintain the normal operation of the world. Since this brand-new spirit-bound tower, which was about to be born and targeted by the Demon Lord, had the possibility of destroying the world, Keyes naturally could not let it be born smoothly. The problem was that defusing a bomb was a technical job. He could not use spells or psionic messages to send reinforcements from the scales of Eternal Order Chamber of Commerce, nor could he ignore the crazy attacks launched by the Wandering Drow clan army on the adventure team. If he wanted to dismantle the core, he was really a little busy for the time being. Bang! Bang! 2 shotgun shells fired from the Wailing Short musket hit the body of a wax demon that was sneaking up on him, and it was knocked back. Then he pulled off the ring of a white phosphorus incendiary bomb and threw it into the wriggling body of the monster. Without the protection of magic, the half-tower's fire resistance was reduced a lot, and soon it became a real candle. But even if they dealt with an enemy so quickly, in the face of the large number of the enemy and the possibility of more backup troops coming at any time, this was in Zal-Ur City, it was still a little inadequate. It would take a lot of effort to get rid of all the enemies. Chapter 978. How much longer are those fellows going to dawdle? Sitting in a booth in the Motney Donnell fast food restaurant, he ordered a milkshake with bacteria, a strong diarrhea fries, a stinky steak burger, a Sawajan sandwich, and other signature delicacies. The slug-like 7th Lord Barzub was waiting for the daring servant to come and ask him for a tip. This fast food restaurant was a famous restaurant in the 9 prisons of Bader. One could find more than one branch in almost every level of the 9 prisons and in every major city. Regardless of whether it was the Batsu Devil or those mortals who entered by mistake or just recklessly, as long as they had calamity coins, anyone could spend money here. Of course, the prerequisite was that the person could find the 2 adjacent sulfur mountains and had the guts to walk towards the lava lake below the suspension bridge connecting the 2 mountains. Then, he would be able to see the real entrance of the Motni Donnell fast food restaurant. "It's so delicious that you can lick my leg," Barzub sneered. With his current appearance, what leg could he lick? This was an advertisement that involved false advertising. The 7th Lord was prepared to teach the Motni Donnell Company a lesson. In the 9 hells, that fellow still hasn't left? In the back kitchen of the fast food restaurant, Reynolds' head popped out from a pot. This fellow's appearance looked a little like the slime lord of the bottomless abyss, Julius. Many devils were guessing whether there was a bloodline connection between the two. However, this fellow with crimson, slippery skin was indeed a proper Batsu devil. Furthermore, he was a very powerful devil count. Unlike the other demon nobles, Reynolds was an elite, unique demon with a unique appearance. He was different from the basic promotion sequence of Batsu, but he did not have a specific target to serve. Or, to be more precise, Reynolds was the vassal of several lords of Bader at the same time. This was all thanks to his fast food restaurants all over the 9 hells. The temporary lord of Avernus, Bayer, conferred him the title of Devil Count because he needed to use taxes to subsidize military expenses. Dis's Lord Despat was the raw material supplier of MacDonald, and in order to ask for more rebates, the second lord also conferred him the title of Devil Count. In Stygia, Reynolds was also an earl, and the 2 upheavals, Pay the Bill and The Shame of Gain Yong, did not affect his position at all, because he kept spending money to buy ice from Stygia to ensure the cold chain transportation of fast food restaurants. In short, Reynolds' noble status came from the influence of the fast food chain he operated. Relying on the influence of the fast food chain, he was able to transfer benefits to many lords of Bot-Or and constantly add items to their treasuries. Among the 9 prisons of Bader, the only one he did not have much contact with was Barzub, who was on the 7th floor of Maladomini. From Reynolds' point of view, this bug overlord couldn't be judged by common sense. Maladomini had the most suitable business environment for fast food restaurants in the 9 hells. The Batsu devil who lived here had always been in the process of constantly migrating. This was because their somewhat neurotic lord always liked to build new capital cities. Every time he built a capital city, he would feel that it was not perfect enough, so he would build a new one elsewhere. Due to their thirst for promotion and their greed for power, the demons of Maladomini would follow their lord to the new capital, to the new center of power, unless they couldn't bear to part with the power they had established in their old land. Under such circumstances, as long as MacDonald chose the right location, it would be easy to gain a foothold and squeeze a considerable amount of money from the money bags of the demons who were busy migrating. In addition, in the process of building the city, Barzub would also kidnap architects and craftsmen from various races from all over the multiverse. These people were not like demons, and eating was not a necessary requirement for demons. They had an objective need to eat. Throughout the 9 hells, other than the canned food, prepared by the logistics department of the Bloody Battle Frontline Society, only the food provided by the McTagney fast food restaurant could satisfy the delicate stomachs and digestive systems of the mortals. It was because the market prospects here were very good that Reynolds had long wanted to establish a partnership with the Bug Overlord. He had wanted to use the same method of dealing with other lords, using rich taxes, various visible and invisible rebates, as well as a good service system to persuade Barzub to support the development of his business here. However, the bug overlord rejected him. The reason was laughable. Barzab thought that the food provided by McDonald, or the fast food restaurant itself, was not presentable. Not to mention opening a restaurant in the new capital city that he had chosen, the existence of McDonald's fast food restaurant in any city in Maladomini, even if it was an old and broken city that had been abandoned for tens of thousands of years, would affect the city's imperfect appearance. Although Reynold relied on his relationship with other lords of the Nine Hells and his own strength to operate hundreds of fast food restaurants in Maladomini, the number of stores was not only incomparable to the number of stores in the other planes of the Nine Hells. Reynold had a huge scale of more than 20,000 stores on the second level of Dis, and he had more than 3,000 stores in the dangerous area of Avernus. But the location of his stores was also forced to choose a very remote place in Maladomini, far away from the city and the various main road. It could be imagined just how deep the grudge this demon count, the head of the largest chain business in the Bardo Nine Hells, held against Barzab was. Although he certainly did not dare to openly challenge a lord, he had already scolded him, idiot, behind his back many times. Despicable slug, you're even worse than the ooze, Reynold cursed in his heart. The ooze could still be used by him, and could be summoned to process some special ingredients, but the slug was simply useless. Reynold lost control of his emotions in anger. His doppelganger, thanks to his own special characteristics, Reynold could leave a part of his body in every fast food restaurant to direct the operation of the restaurant, climbed out of the big crucible, grabbed a sausage that was 6 to 7 feet long and as thick as an adult's wrist on the chopping board, and viciously threw it at a servant in the kitchen. The servant, who had the upper body of a mortal and the lower body of a demon with 7 to 8 thick octopus-like tentacles, was sent flying by the heavy blow and landed in a big cauldron filled with special ooze sauce. Before the unlucky demon could climb out of the cauldron, the ooze that Reynold had carefully cultivated corroded its upper body, leaving only the thick and tough octopus-like tentacles on its lower body. Tomorrow's special is octopus soup. Say that the ingredients are the violent octopus imported from the material plane. The price of each soup will be increased by 5 calamity coins. Say that it's because of the import tax. Reynold's constantly transforming body had an extra mouth, and he loudly announced to the trembling staff in the kitchen. Chapter 979. Reynold decided to be frank with him. After killing a servant demon and using its corpse as the ingredient for tomorrow's special meal, the demon count felt much more stable. He wriggled his jelly-like body and walked out of the kitchen. "Good day, my lord," he said. Facing the owner of Maladomini, even if he was unhappy, Reynold still maintained a considerable amount of respect. "You've finally come out of the Nine Hells. I thought that the suggestion book on every table in the My Tanner fast food restaurant was just a decoration." The seventh Lord Barzab turned his head to look at Reynold. Reynold's jelly-like appearance made him feel like he was looking into a mirror. Although both of them denied this point in their hearts and thought that the other was uglier, slugs and sludge monsters were still somewhat similar. This was undeniable. "Sorry," Reynold was the first to admit defeat in the face of questioning. "Today is the My Tanner Fast Food Restaurant's Film Festival. We are providing free food for everyone today. The special meal you ordered is also the same." "You're not charging?" Barzab asked with a smile. After the seventh lord finished speaking, 2 soul prisms suddenly appeared out of thin air. They fell on the table covered with a human skin tablecloth and collided with each other with a clang sound. "Yes," Reynold immediately replied. The eyes on the soft-bodied demon's body only paused for a moment on the 2 pieces of lower realm hard currency. "Damn it, those are good stuff. At least 100 calamity coins." Then, it turned to another direction. It suddenly felt a little breathless. "You're lying. Even if you sent people to Loot Mountain Paradise, there will be no discounts in the My Tanner." Barzab joked. "When I buy something, I will never shortchange the seller. This is the rule." But you're giving too much. Is the extra part the service fee? Reynold asked cautiously. Even if he was a great demon with wealth comparable to that of a country, he was still a little shaken by the additional income of dozens of calamity coins. The seventh suzerain ignored him and laughed out loud. Along with the laughter, hundreds of millions of flying insects flew out of his mouth and engulfed the entire McDonald's Tanner fast food restaurant in an instant. The travelers who were eating, the servants who worked in the kitchen and the front desk, and Reynolds' clone were all covered by the flying insects. Of course not. I'm rich, but I'm not stupid. Barzab brought a napkin for himself, picked up the knife and fork with his two stubby arms, and began to enjoy his lunch. There was a piece of dark red jelly on top of the smelly steak burger in front of him. This powerful Lord Bator slowly finished all the food he had ordered. After he left, the two sulfur mountains beside the McTagney fast food restaurant abruptly burst into flames. Due to insect infestation, the steel suspension bridge at the top of the mountain suddenly broke and fell straight down. The fast food restaurant building between the two mountains was smashed into ruins. Between the broken walls, there were no longer any living beings. Only two soul prisms were buried deep inside. Bader's second floor, damn it. Standing at the top of a fake cliff made of steel, Reynolds cursed in his heart. However, due to the existence beside him, he didn't dare to say it out loud. One of your perfect incarnations was eaten? Despat, who was wearing noble attire but holding a steel staff that didn't match his attire, softly asked his vassal. His tone was rather calm. Reynolds' slime-like body started to churn in an instant. Due to his anger, his body produced an extremely high temperature, and some gas spewed out from within. That slug lord, he's a lunatic. He's like a bastard with a brain full of nonsense. He doesn't have any of the qualities a devil should have. The devil count spat at Barzab for a full 7 to 8 minutes. The second suzerain and the seventh suzerain were like fire and water. It was no secret that they both wanted to get rid of each other. Thus, Reynolds didn't suspect that the other party would pass this message to Barzab. Are you done talking? Despat patiently listened to Reynolds' complaints before asking, Can you do me a favor? I won't pay you. However, I can bestow this steel cliff to you. Use it as a place to open a new shop. Your Majesty, may I ask, without waiting for Reynolds to ask, Despat's staff struck the devil count's body. He didn't use much strength, but the effect was shocking. As a lone devil, Reynolds wouldn't find it too tiring to deal with a pincer attack from two pit fiends. However, in the face of a proper Lord Bartho, he had no chance to retaliate at all, just like how he had encountered Barzab previously. Reynolds' body immediately turned into steel. His perfect incarnation turned from a slime into a rather strange steel sculpture. The base of this sculpture was the steel cliff beneath his feet. The greater devil's incarnation didn't die. He was only immobile, his consciousness imprisoned within the sculpture. Despat looked at his work and nodded in satisfaction. Then, he continued to chant the incantation. The second lord's incantation was so obscure that even with Reynolds' knowledge, he could only make out a limited number of words. Forced exile from another world, forced steel of fate, reverse Elam's life substitution. Even so, Reynolds had a rough idea of Despat's plan. He also understood why the second lord had bestowed upon him a perfect incarnation when he'd been conferred the title of Devil Count. It was all in preparation for this day. At that time, the paying the bill operation had yet to take place. Despat and Barzab were still allies. For 2 whole days, Despat's mouth hadn't stopped chanting. In order to activate this complicated spell trap that was partially based on Cassus's investiture of the gods, the second lord had gone all out. It was precisely because of this that this spell was powerful enough to expel gods or quasi-gods from a specific plane. He's standing at the edge of the cliff. After the spell was cast, Depard apologetically patted the shoulder of the vassal who was about to stand on the edge of the cliff forever. Perhaps he wanted to comfort Reynold. Regardless of whether the spell succeeded or not, a part of the demon count's consciousness would forever be imprisoned in his perfect, tempered avatar. You have a new shop as well. It's a win-win situation. Chapter 980. Grinder did not have the grace and agility of a drow warrior. In fact, their dance of death left a deep impression on the dwarf. In particular, the wounds on his body had deepened his impression of him. However, what the yellow-bearded dwarf lacked in grace, he made up for in violence. He rushed past a drow that he had cut down and met the charge head-on. After withstanding the impact of the scimitar, he pressed his legs against the ground and remained motionless. At this time, a rare dark elf with a shield rushed to the dwarf's side and used shield bash. Grinder vigorously chopped at the hand holding the shield. His axe split the shield open and even dug into the arm holding the shield. He immediately pulled out his weapon, causing the drow to fall in pain and have to regain his balance. Then, the dwarf attacked again. This time, the axe went through the shield and hit the drow's stomach. Because of the loss of magic, the drow noble warrior's armor could not provide complete protection. The injured creature staggered back, but a long sword suddenly pierced his back. "Damn it, magic area," Jarlaxle muttered. He pulled out the lifesteal sword. The tip of the longsword was still dripping with blood. This was impossible when magic was still attached to it. The battle had reached its climax. In fact, when magic lost its effect, this battle with a huge disparity in numbers became very casual. There were no blazing fireballs, no dazzling lightning. There were only slashes and slashes, punches and kicks, and dodging left and right. Even Keyes was no exception. After the wailing short musket and the electromagnetic assault rifle ran out of bullets, he could not open his spatial equipment, so he could only pick up the dragon head warhammer and engage in close combat with the enemy. The first to be targeted was the molten wax goblins. This kind of slimy monster, whether it was the other members of the adventure team or the two Batsu devils summoned by him, was actually very difficult to deal with when they temporarily lost their ability to cast spells. The molten wax goblins were not afraid of slashing or piercing. Even if they were hit hard, the damage they received was very limited. Keyes always used hammer to repel them and then added a white phosphorus incendiary bomb. This was very effective. Furthermore, there weren't as many wax demons as there were other types of enemies. Therefore, when the wax demons turned into real candles, they began to learn how to avoid battle. Among them, Sterek was the most conspicuous. This melted wax demon, who was the leader of the Earth Goblin blasphemy priests, retreated to the back of the army. Charge! Although he was retreating, Sterek ordered the Tauren and Drow to charge forward. "Take that guy's head and I'll reward you. You will obtain great power." Cunning bastard. After losing the ability to use magic, the Queen of Spiders, Lavis, also hid behind the army. She heard Stalek's ear-piercing roar and gave a rather pertinent evaluation. However, the number of people who were sober was always the minority. The Dark Elves were slightly better. As for the Taurens who couldn't think straight, they actually believed Sterek's promise and challenged Quest together. These 10 feet tall, strong monsters held axes and spears as they charged forward. "Be careful of those bulls." The halfling Calder saw this scene from afar and hurriedly warned Keyes loudly. He also threw a few smoke bombs in front of him that didn't require magic. However, because the distance was too far, this was all he could do. Even if he wanted to provide more help, this great trap maker couldn't do it. But this was enough for Keyes. In fact, even without the help of these smoke bombs, the young blue dragon in human form wouldn't be afraid to fight the Taurens. It must be known that in addition to the unreasonable Megalosaurus, the natural top magical creature, and the powerful psychic ability user, Keyes was also a master of 9 swords. Ironheart style, steel whirlwind. He suddenly jumped into the air, drawing a distorted afterimage as he fell into the range of the smoke bombs like a comet. He swept several torrents with his dragon head. When he jumped back to the ground while maintaining his battle posture, the monsters were already lying on the ground. After Keys finished his move, the momentum of the Tauren's attack immediately came to an end. Their charge was interrupted, and the power of this wave of attack was immediately weakened by at least half. Then, he assumed a new posture and used another unique skill of the Ironheart style, Manticore Whirlwind, on a Tauren that was just about to come out of the smoke. This was a kind of giving someone a taste of their own medicine attack. The dragon head hammer hit the axe in the Tauren's hand like lightning and directed it to a completely different target. The Tauren could no longer control the weapon in his hand and could only swing it at another Tauren that was lucky enough to rush out of the smoke. A long horned head flew high, and blood spurted out from the neck splashed on the Tauren's face. His eyes were covered by blood, and he was slightly absent-minded. In the next second, the dragon head hammer heavily smashed on his head. Death has come. The smell of blood is driving me crazy. In the passage to the House of Gold inside the soul-binding tower, an army composed of earth goblins and bugbears was moving quickly. Most of these guys were only equipped with simple equipment, a non-standard weapon for killing in one hand, and a simple shield made of broken wooden planks in the other. However, the surface of their bodies was covered with scars, one after another, one after another. These scars piled up together as if they were wearing leather armor made of cuticles. They were the berserkers of the goblin-like race, the scarred warriors. At this moment, after receiving the oracle of the powerful, true God that they believed in, they spontaneously gathered together and rushed into the soul-binding tower. To the glory of our God! To please our God! To offer a sacrifice to Him! The scarred warriors roared. They wanted to kill all the lives that were still in the House of Gold at this moment, whether it was the adventurers who sneaked in, or the drows and blasphemous priests who fought with the adventurers before. Just now, outside the soul-binding tower, some earth goblins and drows dared to stop them. Without saying a word, these scarred warriors swarmed forward and annihilated him. Because they created an area of dead magic, communication spells could not be used, so those Starrick did not know that blood was flowing in the drow city outside. And the instigators were his own kind. Chapter 981. Open up all those holes! Among the scarred warriors, a burly bugbear roared. He stepped on a collapsed iron wall and hopped around as he ordered his subordinates to open up the patios in the passage. Sunlight shone directly into the ground from the ground. He was wearing a set of armor made up of layers of armor, and between the gaps of the armor, there would be fluorescent light flashing from time to time. Just like the previous Zhuoweiqi, this bugbear had also fused with the broken armor. In addition to him, there were more than a dozen such monsters in this army of scarred warriors. They were the leaders of this army. After opening the patios and setting up the blazing sun crystal mirror, the seemingly scattered army actually maintained a considerable amount of order. The warm sunlight of the eternal blaze filled the passage and shone all the way into the House of Gold along with the army. To the dark elves, the light of the eternal blaze was like a curse. Even if the light shone in from behind, they still felt deeply uncomfortable. Needless to say, as the light shone in, the screaming scarred warriors actually launched an attack on them. What's going on? Seeing the wandering drow clan suddenly being attacked by their own people, Lavis immediately rushed to Slatak's side. The Spider Queen clutched a precious ion stone in her hand tightly. Although almost all enchanted items could not be used in the area of death magic, items like the dragon head warhammer in Keys's hand or the ion stone, which was created by the great arcanists of Netheril, could still be used. At worst, they would die together. Slatak read Lavis's thoughts from her eyes. However, she had obviously misunderstood him now. The leader of the blasphemous priests could swear that he had never ordered the scarred warriors to rush in and start a massacre. Yes, yes. Slotak suddenly thought of a possibility, which was the only reason why his close relatives would go crazy. It's the seventh Lord, Barzub, who is behind this. That great devil also has believers among the bugbears and earth goblins. In fact, there were still some things that he did not say. There was also a cooperative relationship between Sterek and Barzub. The spirit-binding tower was built with the support of Lord Barzub. While he was considering whether or not to put the dead magic gem, hidden in his body, back into the magic sealing casket, the scarred warriors, who rushed in like a flood, had already followed the path formed by the sunlight and rushed straight to the center of the House of Gold, right below the perfect soul prism. Because they were caught off guard and neither side used magic, they not only killed many drows and taurens with the momentum of their charge, but they also quickly pushed down the Lamia devils summoned by Kays at the cost of their lives. Thanks to their ability to absorb energy from eternal blaze, the Sundering Moon warriors were incredibly strong. With only a dozen or so of them, they were able to drag the great devil several dozen meters away. For our God! The Sundering Moon warriors roared once more and slashed at Namuku with their weapons. Even though the snake-scorpion demon beast was a high-ranked Batsu with thick skin and flesh, its body quickly became a bloody mess when it couldn't use any magic to defend itself against the frenzied attacks. In the end, one of the Sundering Moon warriors landed a final blow and completely severed its neck. Thick, dark green blood seeped out of the Lamia demon's body, and its body quickly shriveled up like a deflated balloon. Not long after, this great devil that had died in the material plane would be summoned back to the 9 prisons of Bader. However, the area of dead magic interfered with this process. Although the power of the 9 prisons of Bader still affected this area, the dissipation of the great devil's body became incomparably slow. Not only that, but the perfect soul prism that had been floating quietly all this time seemed to be guided by the power and instantly understood the path it had to take. It began to tremble, and with the help of the souls of the dead that it had absorbed, wave after wave of pure magic power began to surge out of this perfect soul prism. Like a tide, the power of magic washed away everything that it could touch, and it used this to perceive the surrounding situation. A powerful magic creature, no, defeating it was too difficult for it now. A strange creature with an internal circulation system that even had perception and wisdom, the Forerunner, made it feel jealous, but it was still difficult to defeat it until the core of the soul-bound tower, the magical life, created by using part of the creation principle of Clinthinaben and the magical creation carved out of the perfect soul prism, felt the thing that made it feel uncomfortable before, the dead magic gem, that was hidden in the body of the chief priest of the blasphemy priests, finally reacted. It opened its eyes. The directional pulse of energy shot straight at Sterek, and he was hit before he could even react. More than half of the wax demon's body was washed away, and the remaining body was like mud that was thrown away. With a whoosh, it was pushed to the wall covered in gold foil. In an instant, the dead magic gem hidden in its body was exposed to the air. "No!" Sterek shouted. In the next second, the magic eye shot out a pulse and destroyed the gem. The purple-gray gem was like a burning coal, and it quickly emitted a blazing red light, and then it quickly burned into ashes. The dead magic area was immediately removed. Sacrifice! Begin our sacrifice! Seeing this scene, the bugbears and earth goblins immediately gave the new order to the scarred warriors around them. They became even crazier and brandished their weapons at the drow of their former allies without any explanation. Blood and death were the most pleasing offerings for the god. Whether it was theirs or the enemy's, it would do. Not only that, but the sunlight that shone in from the entrance of the Golden House suddenly became much more intense. Not to mention the drows, even the dwarves and halflings that could live on the surface of the earth felt uncomfortable. The eternal blaze that symbolized life and warmth in the past seemed to have turned into a poisonous fireball at this moment, just as the dark elves said. "We can't let those guys die." Keyes immediately realized the key to the problem. The dead magic area had disappeared, and the core of the soul-binding tower had basically completed its awakening, so he did not need to worry about using spells. Following its master's will, the dragon-head warhammer immediately transformed into a flaming chain. It was like a long snake floating in the air as it slithered around the House of Gold, wrapping up the frenzied soldiers one by one like dumplings. Keyes had already seen that these guys were about to sacrifice themselves. Even if the situation was unclear, they could not let the enemy carry out the plan smoothly. But Chapter 982. As the existence at the top of the pyramid of the Batsu devil family, each of the lords of Batsu had chosen their own path. They had practiced the path of order in different ways. Astamos was the noblest of them all, and he was also the most astute of them all. He had set up an unreproachable goal as a guide for himself. Dispart had once been Astamos' assistant, and he had learned from that old officer, using class and rule to govern his own plane. Maman was focused on benefits, but it was precisely because of this that he always got himself into trouble. Bayer was a newly promoted feudal lord, and he had no choice but to rely on the discipline taught by his big boss to restrain his subordinates. As for Barzab, the lord of the flying insects of Maladomini, perhaps out of a compulsion for perfection or out of paranoia, he preferred reconstruction. He devoted his life to correcting the phenomenon of entropy increase. Although it seemed to be a little strenuous and unrewarding, it was still a good medicine to squander the demon's long life. Moreover, in theory, the phenomenon of entropy increase brought about by chaos would not disappear, so Barzab's pursuit was also endless. The strange hobby of always trying to overthrow something and then rebuild it was also a powerful path of order. However, mortals usually could not understand his behavior, even his most worshippers were no exception. In the Ashen World, in the House of Gold of the Soul-Binding Tower, the army composed of bugbears and scar-faced earth goblins had almost fallen into madness. In order to glory and please the object of their worship, these guys had killed until their eyes were red. They treated the enemies in front of them, their former allies, and even themselves as sacrifices. This kind of fanaticism was so high that even Keyes himself, no matter if he used his psionic power or group-type enchantment spells, were all ineffective against them. The young blue dragon in human form could only awkwardly knock them out. This was very difficult, even many times more difficult than directly killing them all. Moreover, in order to prevent them from completing this sacrifice, Keyes really could not directly crush these guys. For our God! Those scarred warriors who had been brainwashed, even though their bodies were bound, still tried to bite their tongues or even hold their breaths to commit suicide. Thump, thump, thump. Just like a game of whack-a-mole, Hammer kept hammering. Just as Keyes personally took control of the situation, the magical items on his body recovered their effects, and the strength of Jarlaxle, the leader of the Dayet Independent Mercenary Group, also returned. With the help of Phantom Cloak and Displacement Boots, the Dark Elf mercenary leader directly passed through the group of wandering drow soldiers and rushed to Sterek, who was blown away by the magic eye and embedded in the wall. "Do you want to live or die?" It was clearly a question, but his tone was firm. Jarlaxle did not believe that the leader of the blasphemous priests was willing to die. At the same time, he used life steal and bloodlight to cut off one of the tentacles. This didn't take much effort at all. If Stalek wasn't at the end of his rope, then he was releasing his goodwill. He made his decision. "Make that evil eye close," Jarlaxle ordered. "Don't tell me you didn't prepare any countermeasures when you built this spell tower." While Jarlaxle and Sterek were talking, the Spider Queen Lady Lavis had taken over the command of the wandering drow clan army. This powerful female warlock, and warrior used words to intimidate the soldiers who wanted to kill the goblin's scarred warrior. "All of you, stop." Not only that, when the death magic area was lifted, she immediately took out a slaw-toad gem and summoned her personal guards. Under the leadership of 3 slaw-toad curse wizards, a total of 13 slaw-blue toads appeared in the House of Gold. Those magic claw blue toads were all as strong as a tauren. They constantly rubbed the 3 sharp thorns protruding from their palms, making a chi-chi-chi-chi sound. As soon as the 3-headed slaw-green toad appeared, it slammed its cane on the ground, and then hid in the dark. Lavis gave Jarlaxle a death stare. Although she wanted to order the slaw-toad guards to kill this damn dark elf mercenary leader who had killed her once, for the sake of the overall situation, everything that happened here was too strange. Lavis had to put her personal grudges aside for the time being. "Watch over all the drow. Don't let them kill as they please," Lavis ordered the slaw-toad curse wizards through the slaw-toad gem in her hand. Struggling and twisting, Sterek turned from a wax demon into a blasphemous priest. He quickly took the clothes from a drow servant and hurriedly put them on. Then he began to rummage through the bags on the clothes. In the end, he found a small candle that was shining with a green fluorescent light. "Damn you, Lord of the Flying Insects. You're the one who broke the contract first. Don't blame me." Just as the blasphemous priest reached out his finger to the wick of the candle, a pulse shot out from the magic eye and hit the spot where he was standing. Jarlaxle and Sterek both moved to the side and dodged this spell that was very similar in nature to the Finger of Death. However, the drow servant who took the clothes for Sterek was one step too slow. When the magic pulse hit her directly, her dark gray skin immediately revealed an indescribable pale white color. It was as if her blood was instantly drained and her soul was directly shattered. In short, this unlucky dark elf collapsed to the ground and couldn't be more dead. "Damn bastard!" Sterek cursed. He didn't get up from the ground. Instead, he twisted the wick of the green fluorescent candle with his finger. The flame suddenly sprang up, followed by a cloud of green smoke. The smoke was so thick that it didn't seem like it came from a small candle. Instead, it was more like the kind that rose from a bonfire. The smoke turned into a giant net and shrouded the magic eye that was suspended in the center of the House of Gold. As for the golden threads that were connected to the magic eye, they would immediately snap when they came into contact with the smoke. "No, you don't want to do this," a voice suddenly sounded in Sterek's mind. But the blasphemous priest didn't move at all. Instead, he replied in a very disgusted tone, "Get out of my mind! Get out of my mind, you fake life, you devil's creation! You'll regret it! You'll all regret it!" As the smoke gradually approached, the red light of the magic eye flashed faster and faster. It was as if the timer on a time bomb had reached the last second. Chapter 983. The plan is going well. Barzab stretched out his 2 stubby palms and stroked a divination mirror that was shining with a pale blue light. With the help of this treasure, the 7th Lord was able to observe what was happening in the Ashes Bit Wall and predict the outcome in advance. Since the Astamores had transformed him into a despicable slug, Barzab rarely stood in front of the mirror. He was worried that he would be angry when he saw himself in the mirror and then destroy the treasure. However, today was an exception. The meaning of remodeling is to create order, but the fun is in the subversion before the creation. The 7th Overlord opened its huge mouth, and countless flying insects gushed out like a swarm of bees toward the magic mirror in front of it. When they touched the mirror, it was as if they had passed through a barrier made of water. As if they were wrapped in sticky liquid, these flying insects sneaked out of Maladomini, the 7th floor of the 9 prisons of Bader, and embarked on the journey to the Ashes world. When the last flying insect rushed into the mirror, Barzab's shriveled body instantly collapsed to the ground. The mucus that kept flowing on his skin quickly turned into a highly corrosive liquid and digested his avatar that had been used for a long time. The perfect avatar creation method that he had obtained from Reynold was now put to use. After the payment, although Barzub was not imprisoned, he was secretly forbidden by the Lord of Nine Hells to create avatars in the material plane. With the help of the secret spell of Reynold, the demon earl who had opened fast food restaurants all over the 9 prisons of Bader, he had successfully broken the shackles. But just as this avatar disappeared, a violent earthquake suddenly occurred in the strange countryside of Maladomini, which was scorched earth and lava, with swamps and mountains coexisting. The earth cracked, for no reason, and a stream of blood-like viscous liquid suddenly burst out of the ground like a fountain. All the residents living on the 7th floor of Bader felt a great fear. "Dispatch you! You bastard, I'll curse you!" A violent roar rang out from the core of Maladomini. The volume of the roar was so loud that not only did it fill the ears of the inhabitants of the plain, but it even penetrated the 6th, 5th, and 4th layers of the 9 hells, until it reached the steel city of Dis. Powerful and invisible magic power formed invisible chains that penetrated into the ground of Maladomini. They penetrated the body of a behemoth hidden deep in the core of this plain. It was a monster whose lower body was like a slug, but whose upper body was like an angel that had been magnified countless times. They bound Barzub's real body tightly. These chains were all connected to the divination mirror in front of Barzub's dissipated avatar. The 7th Lord's act of transferring his avatar to the material plane was like opening the hatch of a moving plane, causing a strong, negative pressure. And his real body, hidden deep in the ground of Maladomini, was like the cargo or passenger of the plane. Under the negative pressure, he was constantly being pulled into the Ashen world, where the pressure was lower, and was being expelled in a disguised form. If this expulsion really succeeded, the result would undoubtedly be extremely terrible. No matter how long Barzub's real body stayed in that world, even if it was only for a second, because the connection with the 7th floor of Bader was temporarily cut off, his lord status would be dismissed for a second. Without the lord status, the Master of 9 Hells would have an excuse to kill him. Even if Astur Morse wouldn't make a move for some reason, it wasn't as if Barzub didn't have any other enemies in Bartholomew. The 8th Lord, Mephisto, and the 2nd Lord, Despat, all had good reasons to behead him, who had temporarily lost his power. Therefore, Barzub's real body was constantly resisting this pull. However, the power of the spell cast on him was so great. As a result, not only did the real body of the winged insect lord suffer a lot of injuries, but its blood turned into a fountain and gushed out crazily. All the masters in the 9 hells who suddenly understood what had happened turned their gazes in this direction. The various generals of Batsu, the powerful 8 dark demon generals, the group of evil gods living in seclusion in the 9 prisons of Bader, the lords and their vassals of the other planes of Bader. All of them were observing Barzub. Of course, they were only watching now. Although these guys all had the idea of adding insult to injury, no one took the initiative to act. After all, Barzub was not a pushover. However, this strange stalemate was finally broken by a figure that suddenly appeared in Maladomini. It was a tall devil dressed in gorgeous aristocratic clothes. He had 2 small sharp horns on his head, and a powerful magic staff inlaid with a ruby at the top. At the same time he appeared, the eyes of those powerful evil devils who had been watching from the sidelines lit up. "My marshal," Astamor's avatar nodded and looked at the huge canyon that had appeared in Maladomini. He looked at the giant beast that was constantly being tied up underground. "This is your calamity. You can't just avoid it. Moreover, your struggle has not only affected the plane of Maladomini, but even my Nessus is now shaking." So, the Master of 9 Hells raised his ruby scepter high and pointed it at the huge canyon that had cracked open on the ground. A new magic chain suddenly sprang out and also hit Barzub's real body. "I came here to invite you to come with me. Take it as a trip to another plane to relax. Whether you can return or not, it's up to you." As soon as he finished speaking, the stalemate was instantly broken. Baalzeb's true body seemed to have been pulled out by a spring that had been stretched to its limit. He quickly rose from the bottom of the canyon and followed the trajectory of the chains, quickly being dragged towards the palace where he had placed the divination mirror. "Don't worry, I won't do anything to you," Astamor said sincerely as he looked at Barzab, who had turned into an even more terrifying sea of insects and was being dragged into the passage that connected to the Ashes world. "And I've stipulated that your exile will only last for 2 days. At dawn on the 3rd day, I will announce the ownership of the position of the 7th Lord to the 9 Hells." The last sentence of the Master of 9 Hells spread through the 9 Hells of Bader in an instant. However, those who really heard it were actually the top devils who were qualified to see Barzab's real body change. They were either evil gods or unique devils. Even the powerful pit fiends were not qualified to hear this message. In other words, these guys were also qualified to take a step forward. Chapter 984. As mentioned before, the path of order that Astamors had chosen for himself was called purpose. This master of 9 hells was Batsu, the most purposeful of them all. His every action and every word he said was not without purpose. However, almost no one could keep up with his train of thought. The moment Barzab's real body was sent away, the 7th level of Bader had lost the suppression of a Batsu lord. First, there was a large-scale riot in the cities built by the winged bug lord. In order to fight for power, the middle and high-level Batsu devil began to attack each other. In less than an hour, the beautiful and majestic cities were turned into ruins and scorched earth. Following closely behind them were the evil gods who had been living in seclusion. They also began to expand their god's kingdom without any scruples. They tried their best to put all the territories that were temporarily ownerless into their own hand. Inevitably, there was a war between them and other Batsu devil. In addition, the powerful indigenous races that had lived here before the demons occupied Bader also began to riot. Monsters that even the most knowledgeable scholars in the multiverse might not be able to recognize appeared on the earth, in the sky, in the swamps, in the mountains, and in the sea. They appeared in various places of Maladomini and began to take revenge on the demons. However, the more terrifying scene could only be seen from a more macroscopic perspective. Maladomini had lost the powerful real body of Barzab as its cornerstone, so it had become not strong enough. At this time, the 7th level of 9 hells was being squeezed by the 6th and 8th levels. The edge of this plane had collapsed, and some places even slipped directly to the neighboring plains. Fortunately, the incarnation of Astamors had not left. More accurately, although the strongest Batsu devil had hidden his tracks and expressed to all the existences in Maladomini that he had no intention of getting involved in the dispute, he had left the ruby scepter that symbolized the authority of the Master of 9 hells in place. When Barzab was expelled, the divine weapon, which was said to be able to kill greater gods, immediately pierced through the whole of Maladomini and connected to Malbolge and Cania. It used its own power to temporarily pin down this plane so that it would not collapse into the void of the astral plane. As the master of the 9 hells, the Astamors had the responsibility to ensure the integrity of the 9 hells. Otherwise, the 9 prisons of Bader could no longer be called the 9 hells if they lost a level. The title of Master of the 9 hells would no longer be deserved. However, this was not an easy task. Moreover, although Astamors had many avatars, no one knew the exact number. He himself had thousands of avatars every day, and he needed all of them to think and execute countless schemes at every moment. Therefore, he could not devote an avatar to stabilizing Maladomini indefinitely. Therefore, he had set a date. 3 days was the maximum time that Astamors could leave this avatar in this plane. It was also the exact number that he had divined for Barzab, the most troublesome test that could hinder the return of the Lord of the Flying Insects. Moreover, Even if that guy could withstand these 3 tests and return to Maladomini, his original body would definitely be seriously injured. At that time, Astamores could slightly relax his monitoring of this dissident and free up his hands to do other things. This would be enough to make up for the loss of 3 days of leaving his avatar here. If Barzub, unfortunately, died in the world of ashes, Astamores would choose a pawn to replace him. For the Master of the 9 Hells, this was not the first time that he had done this. 4 specific examples. One could refer to the history of the 1st level's temporary lord, Bardi, the palace struggle of the 6th level's Malbolge, and the 2 kings replacement, incident of the 5th level's Stygia. Every time, Astamores had perfectly achieved his goal. Of course, these were all the calculations of the Master of the 9 Hells. It was the kind of thinking that really belonged to the 5th level. Unlike the readers who had the author's full explanation, the thinking of the people in the 9 Hells of Bader could not reach such a high level. In fact, there were not many demons who could understand the true meaning of 3 days. Moreover, even those who were lucky enough to guess a little bit of the true meaning of the Master of the 9 Hells were now confused. What were the 3 tests of Barzub? Because the world of ashes was a famous place in the multiverse that was hated by the gods, it was difficult for the gods to do anything there. Therefore, it should not be any gods who could target Barzub. As for the demons, who stood on the eternal opposite side of the demons, with the efficiency of the low-level races, the Batsu Devil's Chain of Contempt, it was estimated that they would not be able to kill a powerhouse like the Lord of the Flying Insects in 3 days. As for the Batsu, there were not many who could threaten Barzub. The Lord of the Flying Insects was a demigod. Theoretically, only the other Batsu lords and high-ranking demon nobles could, or were qualified to, kill him. Moreover, this was only in theory. Astamores had always been a man of words. Excluding the Master of the 9 Hells, in terms of pure strength, only Mephisto and Prince Levesto could stand shoulder to shoulder with Barzub on the surface. The former had a grudge against Barzub, and would most likely use this opportunity to send his incarnation to kill him. However, the latter was still being preserved in the glacier of Stygia in the form of frozen meat by Astamores. Therefore, he did not have the opportunity to kill the Lord of the Flying Insects. Therefore, it was reasonable to say that Barzub would only face one disaster. As for the demon nobles, although they were also qualified to kill Barzub, their strength did not allow them to do so. A few of the smarter ones, among the demons, the word smart originally meant to be proficient in the way of wisdom, would think that Mephisto might pay some price to persuade the Iron Duke Despot, who was known for his shut-in nature, to go with them. However, even if Despot was included, Barzub could only speculate that there would be 2 disasters. What exactly was the 3rd tribulation? In the House of Gold of the Soul-Binding Tower in Soul City in the World of Ashes, looking at the perfect soul prism that seemed to be about to explode, Keyes decisively summoned a portal and asked the adventurer team to escape. Somehow, he had already felt something and knew that this magic I would definitely have an accident. His plan to explore the underground city and destroy the spirit-binding tower before it was completed had a 99% chance of failing. It seems that there are no tricks in this world. To forge iron, one must be strong. To solve the problem, in the end, I still have to use the power of the scales of eternal order and flatten this place fair and square. Chapter 985. Retreat. Starrick roared. Immediately afterward, the leader of the blasphemy priests turned into a cloud of yellow-green smoke and fled through the passage connecting to the House of Gold toward the city of Drow outside. The other Drow, led by the Spider Queen Lady Lavis, also reacted quickly and tried to find a way to break out. In the core control room of the soul-binding tower, the large space soon became empty, leaving only a pile of corpses and the scarred warrior who was knocked unconscious by Keyes with a dragon head warhammer. At this moment, the confrontation between the perfect soul prism suspended in the middle of the House of Gold and the smoke summoned by Starrick's magic candle finally reached a critical point. Cracks began to appear. On such a magic eye, thousands of cracks appeared in an instant. The surging magic energy turned into a thick amber-colored liquid that flowed out of the core of the soul-binding tower and dripped to the ground. Like a meandering centipede, this viscous liquid slowly meandered on the ground. It passed through the corpses of the dark elves and taurens, passed through the unconscious earth goblins and bugbears, passed through the corpses of the demons and devils that had begun to decay. Everything that was touched by it was quickly assimilated into pure magic energy, turning into something like a faded old photo, and then melting into the thick liquid. Flames, lightning, storms, frost, vicious curses, tempting whispers. Under the influence of magic energy, all kinds of strange scenes began to appear in this House of Gold. In the corner of the House of Gold, a six-legged gold-swallowing beast was shivering. When the leader of the blasphemy priests summoned the dead magic area, as a magic creature, this gold-swallowing beast named Cha-Cha abandoned its poop-picker, the orc druid marsh pheasant, and escaped by itself. It used its sharp claws to tear the gold foil on the wall of the House of Gold, trying to dig a hole that could accommodate itself. Originally, Cha-Cha had already dug out more than 10 yards, but the moment the dead magic area disappeared, the originally soft rock wall became harder than gold and stone. In the end, it had no choice but to return to the House of Gold to find a way out. However, when Cha-Cha returned to the old haunt, it encountered the shattering of the perfect soul prism. The rich magic power had already melted into a viscous liquid, surrounding the metal-swallowing beast from all directions. A whoa! The gold-swallowing beast let out a roar. And at this moment, a coincidence of coincidences appeared once again. The core of the soul-binding tower built by the perfect soul prism suddenly shattered completely, but an earth-shattering explosion didn't happen. In the blink of an eye, a flying insect appeared out of thin air from where the magic eye was originally floating. Barzub, who was far away in the 9 prisons of Bader, used the perfect incarnation and forcibly seized the magic core that was about to give birth to wisdom. The great demon turned itself into the tower spirit of the soul-binding tower. Looking at some of the viscous liquid that was shrinking, the gold-swallowing beast felt a sense of relief. It immediately wanted to run to the opposite side of the House of Gold, to escape as soon as possible. However, just as it was about to reach the end of the passage with its 6 short legs, the gold-swallowing beast suddenly felt a great sense of horror. Its fur all stood up in an instant. Buzz, the flying insects suddenly filled the entire House of Gold. The gold-swallowing beast that was about to escape did not succeed in the end. It was engulfed and assimilated by the flying insects. Together with all the matter and space in the core of the soul-binding tower, it became a part of a powerful creature. The real body of the 7th Lord, Barzub, descended into this world. Astamor's despot, Barzub, whose upper body was as huge as a giant and as handsome as a heavenly creature, but his lower body was just an ugly slug. He roared angrily in the depths of his heart. His resentment was so strong that in the blink of an eye, not only did it completely cover the soul-binding tower, but it also affected the entire Tsok city. The members of the wandering Tsok clan, who had not had time to retreat to the surface, as well as the slave races enslaved by the former, all fell into a state of shock in an instant. Some of them were even scared to death. However, it didn't take long for Barzub's resentment to disappear. This guy seemed to have lost his mind and began to laugh wildly. However, the demonic laughter was still terrifying to mortals. Another batch of unlucky fellows. Although they managed to survive the wrath of the archdevil, they still couldn't escape today's calamity and died one after another. After a full 1/3 of an hourglass, Barzub's real body really condensed in the ash world, and the entire Tsok city was about to completely become a dead city. The seventh lord stretched out his hands and forcefully opened the soul-binding tower that restrained his body. Because when he first performed the perfect incarnation technique, his replacement target was the perfect soul prism that was about to give birth to a complete self-consciousness, which was the tower spirit of the soul-binding tower. So when his real body descended, he still occupied the previous target. In other words, Barzub's real body could not move at will, and his slug-like lower body grew in the ruins of the soul-binding tower. Damn it! Barzub moved his body angrily, but the soul-binding tower gave him the ability to absorb the soul power of the Ash world, and at the same time, it was equivalent to establishing a contract with this world. So he quickly judged that if he didn't pay a certain price, he really couldn't leave the soul-binding tower and move freely. However, when he was exiled from the 9 prisons of Bader by the Astamors, Barzub also heard the prophecy of the Master of 9 Hells. With his wisdom, he naturally understood the deep meaning of the words of the Master of 9 Hells. In these 3 days, there would be a series of demons who were eager to go further to crusade against him, and among them, there were 3 extremely troublesome guys who were very likely to be killed in the material plane. Therefore, Barzub couldn't act according to his own thoughts for the time being. He had to use his power carefully for the time being. At the very least, he had to be careful now. In that case, Barzub stretched his body, and his 2 palms touched the sky of Tsok City. Countless flying insects instantly covered the fluorescent rocks and began to gnaw on them. Chapter 986. Ashen World, Archipelago Province, Main Island City. The atmosphere here was completely different from the other cities taken over by the scale of perpetual order. The stench was filled with the smell of despair. Does despair have a smell? Keyes felt that it could be described. The dark road was filled with a mixture of smells, both sweat and cheap alcohol. Unclean stains stuck to the street, sending out a nauseating stench and other indescribable smells. In other cities under the jurisdiction of the Chamber of Commerce, pedestrians usually traveled in groups, and only occasionally there was a curfew to be observed. The streets in those places were filled with the smell of spices and industrial product. There was the smell of new leather, and sometimes the smell of some livestock. The barracks there were filled with the smell of polish and oil. Every soldier had something to do. Although there weren't many of them, everyone maintained their military discipline. Their uniforms were like shields to prevent any possible chaos. In the main island city, the pedestrians here were usually running around in groups, like a nest of headless flies running around randomly. Even if the army of the main island city wore uniforms, the standard of the Medici Empire, most of their jackets were not buttoned up and their pants were wrinkled. These soldiers were previously under the leadership of the Zagan family, and this leader was obviously not as serious and responsible as the generals in the scale of perpetual order, and his ability was much worse. These people are trash. Contract Mana had always been in charge of foreign affairs, and the handover of the main island city was no exception. What's worse is that we have to be responsible for cleaning them up. Quick and steady. Quess walked past Numun. The young blue dragon in human form walked step by step towards the several dozen meters tall stone gate outside the Zagan family's residence. As he passed through, the door collapsed with a loud bang, turning into a pile of rubble. The house of the first family in the Archipelago province, which had been passed down for more than 300 years, also collapsed with his footstep. Fortunately, half an hourglass ago, everyone in the house had been evacuated. They were sent to the dock of the main island city, boarded the fleet sent by the scale of perpetual order, and quickly left the island. Now, not only the transport ships and Leviathan airships sent by the Chamber of Commerce, but also the merchant ships and pirate ships that were originally docked at the dock of the main island city were all requisitioned by the scale of perpetual order. In the next 3 hourglasses, all the residents in the city would be transported to the land closest to the main island city, which was originally the territory of the Zagan family's rival, the Khalil family. In addition, in the waters around the main island city, young or newly matured blue dragon were constantly flying. They obeyed the orders of the current patriarch Keys, and followed the steampunk half-lich Sneyd to visit the intelligent creatures living in the sea. Whether it was the Sawajan, the Loka, the mermaid clans, or the sea magic creatures that lived alone, they all received the friendly persuasion from the scales of Eternity Chamber of Commerce. They were ordered to immediately migrate to the southern seas to lie low for the time being. If they accepted the persuasion, the Chamber of Commerce would send them a generous compensation package, which would be enough to make up for the losses caused by their hasty migration. Otherwise, Sneyd would let the Megalosaurus act as free porters to drive away those who did not know what was good for them. Within 400 nautical miles around the main island city, not a single intelligent creature is allowed to live. This was a strict order set by Keys. The reason why he did this was actually for the sake of those intelligent creatures. After all, Barzab had come to the world of ashes. After taking over the tower spirit of the soul-binding tower, he could figure out what the Lord of Hell wanted to do with the tip of his tail. In addition to the soul-binding tower built by the wandering drows, there were currently a total of 3 such magic towers in the world of ashes. The souls born after the death of intelligent creatures would be automatically attracted to them. What Keys wanted to do was to destroy the Lord of Hell. Since he was going to keep the Lord of Hell who coveted the world of ashes, he could not give him a chance to replenish his power. However, even though the young blue dragon's decision was quite timely, Barzab's action was not slow. Just as the last batch of residents in the main island city sailed out to sea, a terrifying living magic tower grew out of the sea. The Lord of Balzeb opened the dome of Dziel in city. After destroying the city and reaping the lives of the wandering drow and their slaves who had yet to leave, Balzeb's huge body floated to the surface of the sea. The moment he emerged from the sea, this powerful demon summoned an endless swarm of insects and began a large-scale predatory activity with him as the center. Flying in the sky, swimming in the sea, running on land, as long as they were living creatures, they were all targets of the insects. Those pirates who had played tricks and secretly escaped to some small islands with the scale of perpetual order were the first to bear the brunt of the attack. Because they were intelligent creatures, their souls were now great nourishment for Barzab. In order to deal with the 3 disasters predicted by the Astamors, the Lord of the Flying Insects had to quickly restore himself to his peak state. The insects hissed and blood flowed. The swarm of insects in the sky and in the sea made the surrounding dozens of nautical miles blood-red. If it wasn't for the half-lich Sneider holding the fort, even the blue dragons that were chasing away the last wave of Sawajan would have suffered casualties. For the intelligent creatures living near the main island city, today was their doomsday, and Barzab was their butcher. That powerful sinister devil was desperately thinking about their lives. Not enough, not enough, not enough. Because the response of the scale of perpetual order was quite fast, the Lord of the Flying Insects let out a furious roar when it sensed the scattered, soul power that was far from what Barzab had expected. However, before he could command the swarm to hunt for food further away, the prophesied calamity followed. What was surprising was that the manifestation of this disaster did not come from the 2 enemy lords of the 9 prisons of Bader, Despat and Mephisto, nor from the massive army of Batsu. Instead, it was a monster-like, muscular bugbear goblin. It had huge fangs, strong body, and huge claws and feet. Its name was Hrughek. However, before it could command the swarm of insects to hunt further away, its first wave of disaster followed. The pursuers from the 9 prisons of Bader also followed. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.